Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, has earned a reputation as one of the most paranormally active locations in the state, and perhaps even the world. As a student here, I've experienced my share of unsettling events and heard countless stories about the area's haunted history. Let me share a few of those tales, along with some of my personal experiences. Athens is a town steeped in history, with numerous cemeteries scattered across its landscape. So many, in fact, that it's not uncommon for unmarked graves to be discovered during new burials. Some believe there are Native American burial grounds in the area as well, which only adds to the town's eerie atmosphere. Interestingly, 5 of these cemeteries form a shape that some claim resembles a pentagram, with Wilson Hall, situated near the heart of the campus, at its center. Strangely, while Wilson Hall has its fair share of stories tied to it, it's not considered haunted. The campus is divided into 4 main areas: South, New South, West, and East Greens, all of which are home to residence halls and academic buildings. Across the Hocking River lies the Ridges, an old mental hospital that closed in the 1980s. The history of this place is filled with dark and disturbing tales. One of the most chilling involves a deaf and mute woman who was accidentally sealed inside a wing of the hospital during renovations. When the section was reopened, her body was discovered lying on the floor in a peculiar position, her arms crossed. There were signs of broken glass around her, but she had made no attempt to escape. Even now, the floor where she died still shows stains from that tragic event. The Ridges also has a cemetery where former patients were buried. Their graves are marked only by numbered headstones, and the records of their identities were lost long ago, adding to the sense of abandonment and mystery. In one section, there's a perfect circle of 13 headstones, rumored to be linked to satanic rituals. Whether that's true or not remains a mystery. Athens is also home to a number of other legends. Wilson Hall, located on West Green, is infamous for the story of a woman said to have died under mysterious circumstances. Some claim she was involved in a cult, while others say she hung herself or died violently. Over the years, strange occurrences in her former dorm room led the university to seal it up completely. From the outside, you can still see the window to the room, but inside, there's no trace of it. During my freshman year, I lived in a dorm where I often heard strange noises, marbles or pencils rolling across the floor above me, even late at night. At first, I assumed it was just my upstairs neighbors, but I later found out there was no one living above me. The strange noises continued into my sophomore year, when I became a resident assistant, RA, in the same building. One night, 2 residents came to me complaining about loud furniture moving in the room above them. When I investigated, both groups insisted it was the other causing the noise. Neither got much sleep that night. One of my most unsettling experiences happened during RA training. I moved in a day earlier than the other RAs and stayed in a room on the top floor. Above me was nothing but the roof, yet I often heard furniture being moved upstairs. My assistant RA told me she'd heard the same noises and was relieved when I arrived, so she could blame it on me. Even my boyfriend, who stayed with me for a few nights, noticed the sounds, though we both knew no one could possibly be up there. Later, some friends and I decided to visit the Ridges Cemetery at night. It was a full moon, so we didn't need flashlights. One of my friends, who identifies as Payton, asked me to check out a particular headstone where he'd felt a sense of anger before. When I approached it, I was overwhelmed with sadness, but there was no anger. As we walked back up the hill toward the car, I heard a low growl coming from the woods on the far side of the cemetery. It wasn't an animal I recognized, and it chilled me to the core. One of my friends admitted hearing it too, and we quickly left. To this day, I can't explain what made that sound. Not all experiences on campus are paranormal, but some are just as unnerving. One night, I was watching Maximum Overdrive, a Stephen King movie about machines coming to life and attacking humans. As the credits rolled, my smoke detector went off for no apparent reason. The incense I had burned earlier had long since gone out. It lasted only a couple of seconds, but it was enough to send me pacing the hall for a while to calm my nerves. Athens is a unique place, full of history and stories that blend the mysterious with the mundane. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, It's hard to deny the strange energy that lingers here. Who knows what else this old campus holds in its shadows? When I asked my mother, "Why do we have to respect the dead?" she shared a chilling tale from our family history, a story that happened to my grandmother's cousin, John, in a small rural town in Texas, near an old, decaying cemetery. John was a young man, happily engaged to marry a beautiful woman named Sarah. As their wedding day drew closer, they were filled with joy. But just 3 weeks before their big day, John's great-aunt passed away. Though grief-stricken, John attended her burial with his family. Even amidst the sadness, the excitement for his wedding still lingered in his thoughts. As the family began to leave the cemetery, John stayed behind. As he wandered through the old, forgotten graves, his eyes landed on a skull lying on the ground. Without thinking, he kicked it playfully and said with a smirk, "Hey, why don't you come to my wedding?" Laughing to himself, he ran off to rejoin his family, brushing it off as a moment of dark humor. 3 weeks later, John and Sarah were married in a beautiful ceremony. The church was filled with loved ones, and the air was warm with joy. But as John entered, his eyes caught something strange. A figure sitting in the very last pew, dressed all in black, with a long veil hiding their face. The figure was still and silent, not moving or speaking. John thought nothing of it and focused on his special day. At the reception, the figure appeared again, now seated at the last table. John, both curious and unnerved, asked his sister, Emma, to bring the guest some food. When Emma returned, she whispered, "It's a woman under that veil, but she doesn't want anything." As the evening went on, the mysterious figure slowly rose from her seat and began walking toward John. In a soft yet chilling voice, she said, "Since you invited me, you must take me home." John's heart began to race. Frightened, he rushed to the priest, desperate for guidance. The priest listened carefully, and then gave him strange, urgent advice. "Take a baby with you," the priest said gravely. "No matter what she says, keep the child with you at all times." Following the priest's instructions, John borrowed Emma's baby and approached the veiled woman. "It's time for me to take you home," he said, his voice shaky. The woman glanced at the baby in his arms, her face clouding with disapproval. "You cannot bring this child with you," she said coldly. John, despite the mounting fear, stood his ground. "The baby is mine, and she won't stay with anyone else," he replied. The woman hesitated, but finally relented. "Fine," she said in a hollow tone. John led the woman to his car, still holding the baby tightly. She gave him precise, unsettling directions, her voice quiet but commanding. Eventually, she told him to stop at an old, overgrown cemetery on the outskirts of town. John's heart pounded as he stepped out of the car, baby in his arms. The woman led him deeper into the cemetery, guiding him toward an ancient grave. When they reached the grave, the woman suddenly stopped. "You really don't remember me, do you?" she asked, her voice growing icy. John, shaking, replied, "No." The woman's voice turned frigid as she continued, "A while ago you came to this place and disturbed my rest. You invited me to your wedding." She paused, her voice turning chillingly final. "I was going to take you to my grave, where you would suffer for your disrespect. But I cannot harm you now, because you have an innocent with you. Let this be a lesson. Always respect the dead." With those words, the woman stepped onto the grave and removed her veil. Her face was no longer human. It was a bare, grinning skull. John's blood ran cold, and a scream tore from his throat. He bolted, running back to his car as fast as his legs could carry him. He drove away, heart racing, never daring to look back. Within days, John and Sarah left the small Texas town, never returning. They went on to live a happy life together, but John never forgot his terrifying encounter. He never again joked about the dead, always remembering the chilling warning the woman had left him with. This story takes place in 1964, in my hometown of Noonan, Georgia. when I was just 3 years old. Although I don't remember the event myself, I know it to be true because my grandmother told me the story many times, and both my mother and grandfather confirmed every word. It happened one early summer morning. My grandmother had just finished her housework and was hanging freshly washed clothes on the backyard clothesline. After hanging the last piece, she picked up the laundry basket and started walking back toward the house. Suddenly, she felt an icy chill travel down her left shoulder, run the length of her arm, and out through her fingertips. She froze, startled by the sensation. Looking down, she noticed something odd. Her wedding ring, which she never took off, was no longer on her finger. Alarmed, my grandmother retraced her steps, searching the area around the clothesline and the path back to the house. The ring was nowhere to be found. She even searched the house from top to bottom, but it had simply vanished. When my grandfather came home from work that evening, my grandmother was in tears. She explained what had happened, and together they searched again, combing through every inch of the yard and house. Despite their efforts, the ring remained missing. Days passed, and my grandmother continued to search, growing more and more heartbroken each day. The following Saturday, my grandfather suggested they go fishing at the old mill pond, a favorite pastime of theirs. Hoping to lift her spirits, my grandmother agreed. They gathered their cane poles, bait, and supplies, then headed to the pond. About an hour into their fishing trip, my grandmother hadn't caught a single fish. Frustrated, she propped her cane pole against a forked tree branch she brought along for such occasions and wandered over to where my grandfather was fishing, about 30 feet away. As she walked, a gleam of light caught her eye. She turned her head toward it and froze. There, in a patch of grass, lay something shiny. Blinded momentarily by the reflection, she moved closer. Her breath caught as she realized it was a ring, identical to her missing wedding ring. Shaken, she called out, "Bill, come over here." Hearing the urgency in her voice, my grandfather dropped his pole and hurried over. He bent down, picked up the ring, and examined it. "It looks just like yours," he said, bewildered. "It does," my grandmother replied, her voice trembling. She took the ring from his hand and stared at it. A strange detail caught her attention. There was a bit of what looked like biscuit dough caked around the setting. Her heart sank. She suddenly remembered making biscuits the night before the ring had gone missing. She'd been wearing the ring at the time and had forgotten to clean it afterward. A chill ran through her. She knew, somehow, she knew that this was her ring. But how had it ended up at the mill pond, a quarter-mile from their home? She slipped it back onto her finger, where it fit perfectly, just as it had for the past 30 years. The story doesn't end there. The old mill pond had a tragic history. Over the years, 2 people had drowned there. One was a little boy who'd accidentally wandered too close to the water. The other was a young woman my grandparents had known. Heartbroken after being abandoned at the altar, she had taken her own life in the pond, never receiving the wedding ring she had so desperately longed for. Could the spirit of this woman have taken my grandmother's ring, perhaps drawn by its significance? My grandmother never knew for sure, but she wondered if, upon seeing the grief her loss had caused, the spirit felt compassion and decided to return the ring, leaving it on the bank where my grandmother would find it. Whether it was coincidence or something more, my grandmother never doubted that the ring's disappearance and reappearance carried meaning. She cherished the ring even more deeply after that day, a reminder that some things in this world, like love and loss, are as mysterious as they are profound. Underscore 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 underscore. Rewritten version. This story takes place in 1964 in my hometown of Pine Lake, Georgia, when I was just 3 years old. Though I don't remember the event myself, I know it's true because my grandmother shared it with me countless times, and both my mother and grandfather confirmed every word. It happened one early summer morning. My grandmother had just finished her housework and was hanging freshly washed clothes on the backyard clothesline. After securing the last piece, she grabbed the laundry basket and started walking back toward the house. Suddenly, an icy chill traveled down her left shoulder, ran the length of her arm, and out through her fingertips. She froze, startled by the sensation. Looking down, she realized something was missing. Her wedding ring, which she had worn every day without fail, was gone. Panicked, my grandmother retraced her steps, searching the ground around the clothesline and the path back to the house. The ring was nowhere in sight. She even scoured the house from top to bottom, but it had simply vanished. That evening, when my grandfather came home from work, my grandmother was in tears. She explained what had happened, and together they searched again, combing through every inch of the yard and house. But despite their efforts, the ring remained missing. Days passed, and my grandmother's heartbreak deepened. The following Saturday, my grandfather suggested they go fishing at an old pond near the abandoned sawmill, a place that held fond memories for them. Hoping to lift her spirits, my grandmother agreed. They packed their gear and headed out, eager for the peaceful escape. An hour into their fishing trip, my grandmother hadn't caught a single fish. Frustrated, she leaned her cane pole against a forked branch she brought along and walked over to my grandfather, who was fishing about 30 feet away. As she walked, something shiny caught her eye. She turned toward it and stopped. There, in a patch of grass, lay a gleaming object. Mesmerized by the reflection, she moved closer. Her breath caught when she realized it was a ring, exactly like the one she had lost. Shaken, she called out, "Bill, come here." Hearing the urgency in her voice, my grandfather dropped his pole and hurried over. He picked up the ring and studied it. "It looks just like yours," he said, baffled. "It does," my grandmother replied, her voice trembling. She took the ring from his hand and examined it. A strange detail caught her attention. There was what appeared to be biscuit dough stuck around the setting. Her heart sank. She suddenly remembered making biscuits the night before the ring had disappeared. She'd been wearing it at the time and had forgotten to clean it afterward. A chill ran down her spine. She knew, somehow, she just knew, that this was her ring. But how had it ended up at the mill pond, a quarter-mile away from home? She slid it back onto her finger, where it fit perfectly, just as it had for the last 30 years. The story doesn't end there. The old mill pond had a tragic history. Over the years, 2 people had drowned there. One was a little boy who had wandered too close to the water, while the other was a young woman my grandparents had known. She had taken her life in the pond after being abandoned at the altar, never receiving the wedding ring she had longed for. Could her spirit have taken my grandmother's ring, perhaps drawn by its significance? My grandmother never knew for certain, but she wondered if, seeing the grief her loss had caused, the spirit of the woman had felt compassion and decided to return the ring, leaving it on the bank where my grandmother would find it. Whether it was coincidence or something more, my grandmother never doubted that the ring's disappearance and reappearance held meaning. She cherished the ring even more after that day, a reminder that some things in this world, like love and loss, are as mysterious as they are profound. I've lived in the same house for most of my 35 years, my childhood home in the small town of Pine Lake. Over the years, the house has developed a reputation for strange occurrences, but the eeriest events always seem to center around the master bedroom. It's almost as if something, or someone, is keeping watch over the room and over us. The presence I've felt most often seems like a female spirit, whose activity, though unsettling, feels more protective than threatening. When my younger sister was a child, she had an experience in that very room that she'll never forget. She was about 10 when it happened. One night, she woke up and saw a woman standing by the foot of her bed. The woman was draped in a long shawl that covered her head and shoulders, and she was holding a small child in her arms. My sister blinked, hoping it was just her imagination playing tricks on her, but the figure remained there, watching quietly. Despite the strangeness, my sister wasn't frightened. She said she simply stared for a while. And then, like it was no big deal, she drifted back to sleep. Years later, after my husband and I moved into the house, I began to feel that same presence. It became especially noticeable after our youngest son was born. On several occasions, I woke to find his cradle placed next to our bed, gently rocking as though someone unseen were soothing him to sleep. One night, while watching TV with my older son, I noticed something strange. The volume bar on the screen appeared on its own, slowly decreasing. I searched for the remote, and after some looking, found it sitting on the bed, far away from where we had been sitting. Little things like that happened more often, especially when the boys would cry in the middle of the night. I would lie there, listening, waiting for them to settle down, and sometimes I'd hear a soft, rustling sound, like favorite brushing against something. Or, one particularly odd evening, the faint sound of a small bell tinkling, as though someone was there, reminding me to check on the kids. And then there's the unmistakable feeling of being watched, especially in the doorway of the master bedroom. One evening last fall, I got confirmation that I wasn't imagining it. My husband had gone out, and I was alone with the boys. It was late, so I turned off all the lights and the TV and tucked my older son into bed with me. A few minutes later, I had that sensation again, that someone was standing just outside the room. Almost on cue, my son whispered, "Mom, I don't like being stared at." His words froze me in place, and I immediately turned the lights and TV back on. There have been other strange moments, like the time when the spirit seemed to communicate directly with the boys. When my older son was 3, our nanny experienced something unsettling. One day, while she was in the kitchen with our youngest, my older son was in the master bedroom watching TV. She heard him speaking and getting upset, so she went to check on him. He told her, quite firmly, to leave the room. Concerned, she stepped just outside the door, but stayed close enough to listen. To her surprise, she heard him say, "I don't want to play with you. Go away. I only want to play with my mommy, daddy, and Debbie." He was definitely speaking to someone, but there was no one there. Our younger son, now 2.5, has had his own strange moments. One night, he crawled into bed with us and stared toward the open doorway. Out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you live here?" I was confused and replied, "Of course I do." But he ignored me and repeated the question, still staring into the empty doorway. It reminded me of the age when our older son started experiencing similar encounters. The most chilling event happened just last week. I was sitting in the master bedroom with my boys and our dog, watching TV. The bedroom door was open, and the door to the room across the hall was closed. Suddenly, the door to the other room began slamming, violently, like something, or someone, was desperately trying to get out. The slamming continued 4 or 5 times. Our dog went berserk, barking and growling. Once I gathered the courage, I took the dog and went to check the room. There was nothing. No open windows. No drafts. No explanation for what had just happened. I closed the door again and returned to the bedroom. The dog, still on edge, stood frozen, her fur standing on end. Then she started tracking something with her eyes, following it across the room at ceiling level. I couldn't see anything, but the way she moved told me she could. What made this particular event so unsettling was how blatant it was. Normally, the spirit is much more subtle, a quiet presence in the background. But this was different. Despite all the strange occurrences, I've come to accept that whatever shares our home with us means no harm. In a strange way, it feels as if the spirit is watching over us, ensuring that we're safe. I still don't fully understand it, but I'm certain of one thing. This presence is here to protect, not to harm. This is a true story, and it's something my uncle and I will never forget. It happened when I was 19. Ironically, the same age my uncle was when it happened. We grew up together in a quiet corner of northern Michigan, an area nestled deep in the woods with the nearest town miles away. Our home was surrounded by dense forests, with a river winding just over a mile from our house. The only way to reach our favorite spot along the river was by foot or ATV, and it became our daily escape, the place we went to fish, relax, and unwind. As we grew older, we began camping by the river on weekends, turning it into a regular adventure. One summer evening, we planned another camping trip, expecting our friend from downstate to join us. He'd been with us countless times before, but this time something came up, and he couldn't make it. Undeterred, my uncle and I decided to go without him. Instead of setting up camp in our usual spot, we decided to try somewhere new, downstream by a high bluff about a quarter-mile away. The spot overlooked the river, perched about 100 feet above it, with the forest surrounding us on 3 sides. By day, it offered a breathtaking view, but that night, we would come to regret choosing that location. At first, everything seemed normal. We gathered firewood, built a roaring campfire, and spent the evening talking, reminiscing about old times as the sun set. By 11 p.m., we were ready to call it a night and crawl into our sleeping bags. That's when we heard it. The first noise, a loud crack, like the sound of a large branch snapping somewhere below us. We paused, listening. It was odd, but not alarming. We shrugged it off, attributing it to the usual noises of the forest. Then came another sound. This time, it was closer, coming from about a third of the way up the slope, not far from where we were. My uncle, ever the skeptic, suggested we stay alert, just in case. We had a 12-gauge shotgun with us, loaded with plenty of shells, but we didn't feel overly worried. We added more wood to the fire and shined our flashlight down the slope, scanning the area, but saw nothing. Another 30 minutes passed. Just as we were about to settle in again, we heard it, footsteps, crunching leaves, and the unmistakable sound of something heavy moving through the brush. It wasn't a deer or anything normal. The movement was too fast, almost like a small animal, but the noise was too loud, too deliberate. The sounds were circling us, as if whatever was out there was testing the perimeter of our campsite. My uncle grabbed the shotgun and I trained the flashlight on the area where the noise seemed to originate. But no matter how hard we looked, we couldn't see anything. All we could see were the effects, leaves being kicked up in the air and bushes shaking violently as if something invisible was charging through the underbrush. Panicking, my uncle aimed the shotgun in the direction of the commotion and fired. The noise stopped instantly. The forest fell eerily silent. We sat there, hearts pounding, debating what it could have been. An animal? No, it didn't feel like any animal we knew. It didn't behave naturally. Another 30 minutes passed in uneasy silence before the noises began again. This time, they started at the bottom of the slope and made their way up toward us, drawing closer with each pass. We waited, barely breathing, until it was about 10 feet away, and then my uncle fired again. The noise stopped, just like before. But it didn't end there. The same pattern repeated itself throughout the night. Every 30 minutes, the sounds would return, circling closer and closer. We never saw what was out there, but it felt like something was moving in the dark, just beyond the light of the fire. We even let it get as close as 5 feet before firing again. Each time, the sound stopped, only to start up again later. By the time morning arrived, we hadn't slept a wink. We sat by the fire, gripping the shotgun, clutching the flashlight, counting down the hours until daylight. When the sun finally came up, the forest was still and silent, as if nothing had ever happened. Without a word, we packed up and left, never looking back. We called the spot Devil's Point, and neither of us has returned since. Looking back, we're convinced it wasn't just an animal. There was something else out there with us, something we couldn't see but could definitely hear and feel. The way it moved and circled us was unnatural, almost intelligent. We've told a few people about it, but it's impossible to convey the sense of fear and confusion we felt that night unless you were there to experience it yourself. I live in Montana now, but every once in a while, I think about that night. If I ever make it back to Michigan or the Upper Peninsula, I'd be willing to take an investigative team to Devil's Point. But there's one thing I know for sure. I won't be camping there again. Whatever it was, I never want to cross its path again. My father's family hails from a quiet, rural town in central Texas, where the land stretches out in endless fields, dotted with old oil rigs and cattle ranches. It's a place full of dusty roads, endless skies, and memories that feel like they're stuck in time. Growing up, my dad would tell us stories about his childhood here, of summer days spent with his grandparents and cousins, all of them gathered around for family meals, hunting trips, and fishing in the nearby creek. Naturally, when my sisters and I came along, he wanted us to experience the magic of his beloved hometown, to see what shaped him into who he was. So one summer, we made the long drive from the city to the small town he always spoke so fondly of. It was 1968, and I was 14 years old, full of anticipation for the few days ahead. We arrived at my great-aunt and uncle's modest home, a house I'd stayed in before and always found charming. That night, after a late dinner, my dad and uncle decided they would wake up at dawn to go fishing. So after a quick talk, they turned in for bed early, and I was set up to sleep in the living room on a fold-out chair that could transform into a twin bed. Once settled in, I began reading The 5 Little Peppers, a sweet, simple story. But just as I was getting comfortable, my dad called out from the other room, telling me to turn off the light. I wasn't particularly tired, but my dad didn't like to argue, so I reluctantly obeyed. The room fell into a deep silence, and I lay there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe just a shadow or a reflection. But then, from the corner of the room, something moved. It seemed like a shape rising, slowly, from behind a chair. I blinked hard, convinced it was just the moonlight seeping through the blinds. But when I opened my eyes again, the shape was much closer, no more than 2 feet away from me. And it wasn't just a shadow. It was floating, hovering about 8 inches off the ground. I could barely make out the shape of a man, slightly built, wearing a fedora-style hat and a long, tattered overcoat. The hem of the coat was ragged, and something seemed to be falling from it, as if the fabric itself was decaying. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I realized that the figure wasn't just floating. It was staring directly at me. The fear was instant. I knew, deep down, that it wasn't just there to watch. It wanted me to be afraid, and that thought paralyzed me. I tried to scream for my dad, but the words stuck in my throat. The figure didn't move closer. It just hovered there, silently, its presence growing more menacing with each passing second. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I found my voice and screamed for my dad. He didn't waste a second. He came rushing into the room, flicking on the light. Relief flooded through me, but I felt an overwhelming sense of dread as I tried to explain what I'd seen. Of course, my dad laughed it off, convinced it was a figment of my imagination. But he saw how shaken I was, and after a long pause, he offered to switch rooms with me. That night, I slept in his room, but nothing else happened. Or so I thought. 2 years later, my sisters and I were talking with our mom when the subject of ghosts came up. My parents had always been skeptics, dismissing anything paranormal with a laugh. So when I finally shared the story of that night at my great-aunt and uncle's house, my mom simply laughed, as expected. But I was too frustrated to stay. I stormed off, leaving the room. Moments later, my middle sister followed me into the bathroom, closing the door behind her. She asked me, with a serious tone, if I was sure about what I had seen. I was still angry, still shaken, but I told her with certainty that I was. Then, she shocked me with what she said next. She told me that when she was about 5 or 6, she had seen the same figure. On one of her visits to that same house, she had been lying on the floor on a pallet, beside our older sister, who had already fallen asleep. As soon as the lights went out, the figure appeared. It leaned over her just like it had done to me. She could hardly breathe from fear, paralyzed and unable to scream. The figure hovered over her for what felt like hours, feeding off her terror. Exhausted, she eventually drifted to sleep, but the memory haunted her for years. As the years went by, we learned more about the house. It had once belonged to our great-grandmother, who had lived there in her final years. According to family lore, she often spoke about being visited by a ghost. She would claim that the spirit appeared every night, but no one believed her, dismissing her claims as the ramblings of an elderly woman. The house wasn't old when she moved in during the 1940s. It had been a rental property owned by a distant cousin's husband, a banker who had a reputation for being ruthless, especially during the Depression when he foreclosed on many homes. He was known for his dislike of children, a detail that seemed to add another layer of mystery to the house's history. We'll never know exactly who or what that figure was, but it's clear that the house, the land, and perhaps its past residents left a lasting mark on those who stayed there. To this day, I can't explain what I saw, but I know it wasn't a figment of my imagination. My sister's account, so eerily similar to mine, only solidified my belief. Whether it was the house, the land, or something else entirely, one thing is certain. The figure we encountered wasn't there to comfort us, and it's a memory neither of us will ever forget. I'm an actor working with a theater company based in New Jersey, and what follows is a strange chronicle of unexplained events that happened to me and several other members of our crew in our current theater space. The building, which we occupy on the top floor, is part of an old annex connected to a private school in the heart of a bustling town. Over the years, it served as a bar, a dance hall, a theater, a reception hall, and more. Although we don't know exactly when it was built, old photos and architectural features suggest the place has been standing for about 150 years. From the moment we first walked through the doors, the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. The dark, crumbling walls only added to the eerie atmosphere. As we climbed the main stairway to the top floor, it was impossible to shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching us. Our construction and tech guy was the first to notice something strange. He spent a lot of time in the space, fixing up the lighting and the sets for our performances, and he mentioned feeling a strange presence. He frequently saw a shadowy figure, a tall man in his early 40s, lurking in the doorways or near the bathrooms. Every time he turned to look directly, the figure would vanish. One night, after locking up late, he even saw the figure walk up the stairs toward him. But instead of running, he decided to confront it. As he walked right through the figure, he said it felt freezing cold and that it was probably just some sort of residual energy, a lingering imprint of the past. Even though I believe in the supernatural, I brushed off his account until I started having my own encounters. After one of our opening nights, I was locking up the dressing rooms when I saw a shadow dart from the green room into a nearby stairwell. It only lasted a second, but I saw it clearly. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice other strange occurrences. A cloud of white smoke that would appear near the bathrooms or the fire escape, only to disappear just as quickly, and the constant feeling of being watched. At first, I assumed it was just leftover energy from the old building, just as our tech guy had suggested, but things started to escalate during our next production. During a rehearsal for the next show, one of the actresses saw a tall man standing in the corner of the stage. Thinking it was a fellow actor, she approached him, only for him to disappear right before her eyes. Later that night, during a dress rehearsal, all of her props, costumes, and makeup disappeared from where she'd left them. Minutes later, everything was back in its place, as though nothing had happened. This happened a few more times during the run of the show, though less frequently. It became clear that this wasn't just residual energy. We were dealing with a conscious entity. To ease the tension, I decided to try and communicate with the ghost, hoping to make peace with it. For a while, things seemed to settle down. The sightings and disruptions grew less frequent, and I even began to speak to the ghost, almost like a roommate, casually acknowledging its presence. But then, one Saturday, things took a darker turn. I came to the theater alone to mop the floors, and as I worked, I suddenly felt a sharp, burning sensation on my shoulder. When I looked, I saw 2 red welts running down toward my chest, thin scratches that hadn't been there before. Anger, not fear, took over. I stormed into the theater and yelled at the ghost for a solid 5 minutes, demanding it leave us alone before storming out. The outburst didn't help. In fact, it only seemed to provoke the entity. After that, the shadowy figure appeared more often, and the activity grew bolder. One afternoon, while searching for a bench, a producer and I heard a loud crash from the stairs. A moment later, we heard heavy footsteps, like boots, echoing up the stairwell and into the open doorway of the room we were in. The floor creaked under invisible footsteps, as if someone had entered the room. We couldn't see anyone, but at that point, we were used to strange noises, so we brushed it off. Eventually, I stopped acknowledging the presence, and the disturbances faded a bit. Later, when the space underwent major renovations, the activity seemed to stop altogether. We thought the changes might have disturbed whatever energy was there, and for a while, it seemed we were in the clear. But the ghost wasn't gone for good. During our most recent show, it made itself known again. One actress reported hearing her name called from behind her, even though no one was around. Others started mentioning they felt a presence when using the bathrooms, and that I had my last encounter. One night, as I was leaving the building, I happened to glance at a dark basement window. Suddenly, the window slid open on its own, rising about a foot. There was no one else in the building. Due to contract disputes, we'll be moving out of the space soon. While part of me feels relieved to leave behind these strange happenings, I can't help but wonder what, or who, will inherit the ghost. I hope they have better luck dealing with it than we did. I've lived in this house in Northern California for about 10 years now. It's an average home, nothing particularly unusual about it. There aren't any dark secrets or tragic histories tied to it. But as time went on, some unsettling things began to happen. The first incident happened within the first 6 months of moving in, involving my grandmother and younger sister. My grandmother, visiting from Mexico, was staying with us and shared a bedroom with my sister, who was about 6 or 7 years old at the time. One night around 1 a.m., my grandmother was woken by a squeaking noise. As she became more alert, she also heard a strange bumping sound coming from the floor. When she looked around for the source of the noise, she saw my sister's bed shaking violently. My sister, a deep sleeper, remained completely unaware of the motion. Convinced it wasn't an earthquake since nothing else in the room was moving, my very religious grandmother grabbed her rosary and started praying. But the shaking only grew stronger. Eventually, my sister woke up, screamed in fear, and jumped into my grandmother's bed. As soon as she did, the shaking stopped. My grandmother comforted her and reassured her it was just an earthquake, suggesting they pray together. The next morning, my grandmother mentioned the incident to my mom, and the family assumed it was a minor tremor that hadn't made the news. My sister, too young to question it, accepted the story. It wasn't until 8 years later that the truth about that night came to light. Fast forward to 8 years later, and the house was facing another difficult time. My parents were having serious marital issues. My father, consumed with jealousy, accused my mother of infidelity, despite her denials. In our family, there's a belief that infidelity brings misfortune, often affecting the children of the unfaithful. Around this time, strange things started happening again. Footsteps echoed in the hallway at night. I heard a strange flapping sound, almost as if a large bird had flown into the house. My dad checked the attic but found nothing. Our cats, who would usually chase away any birds, hadn't reacted at all. My sister and I, without ever talking about it, became terrified of walking through the kitchen late at night. It wasn't until much later that we admitted we both had the same fear. By this point, I was 19, married, and living in the back section of the house with my husband and our 6-month-old son. One afternoon, I came home to find the house empty. The tension was so thick, it felt like everyone was avoiding each other. I went into the bathroom to prepare a bath for my son. As I sat on the edge of the tub, holding my baby, I suddenly felt a sharp tug on my hair. Thinking it was my husband, who liked to tease me by pulling my hair, I spun around to give him a scolding, but no one was there. My heart dropped as I realized I was completely alone in the house. I tried to rationalize it, calling out to my husband and walking around the house, but the only car in the driveway was mine. Still, I didn't feel the panic I should have. I returned to the bathroom, shut the door, and finished bathing my son. Afterward, I locked myself and my baby in our room until someone else came home. It wasn't until later, when my dad arrived home, that the fear set in, and I began shaking uncontrollably. I told him everything. To my surprise, he revealed that he had been hearing strange noises for a while. At first, he had set up recorders around the house, hoping to catch my mom in the act. But what he actually recorded were eerie sounds, footsteps, metal bending, and even faint music. My mom dismissed it as imagination, but eventually, she too started hearing the sounds. Now convinced something was wrong, she asked a local priest to bless the house, and we all started attending church more regularly. The strange events didn't stop right away, but they did gradually fade as my parents worked through their issues. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if the emotional turmoil and negative energy in the house might have triggered some kind of poltergeist activity. Or maybe the strange occurrences were unrelated to that first night of the shaking bed. Either way, the disturbances finally stopped about 4 years ago and haven't returned. Well, aside from the occasional visit from a deceased relative, but that's a different story altogether. What happened to me one cold, winter night in the small town of Pine Lake, Ohio, changed everything. I work on a farm just outside of town, a secluded place surrounded by the woods. In the summer, the farm is full of life, with visitors passing through, but the winters here are harsh, quiet, and lonely. The farmhouse I live in is off the grid. No TV, no phone. Too far from the main road to make any of that worthwhile. Most nights, my roommate and I sit by the fire, reading or playing cards, and we head to bed early. On this particular night, my roommate, who owns the farm, was visiting family up in Cleveland. I locked the doors around 9:30 p.m. and settled into bed. The storm outside was brutal, with rain lashing against the windows and the wind howling through the trees. It was what we call in Ohio a gully washer of a night, wet, windy, and bone-chilling. As I lay there, the storm seemed to get louder. Then through the wind and rain, I heard it, a faint but persistent knocking at the door. I pulled on a pair of jeans and hurried down the stairs. My mind was racing with questions. Who could be calling at this hour? And in weather like this? I opened the door, and the blast of cold air and rain hit me like a slap. But no one was there. I peered out into the darkness, seeing nothing but the silhouette of trees bending in the wind. Assuming it was just the storm playing tricks on me, I started to close the door. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure hunched by the porch railing, just a few feet away. I rushed over. It was a man in his 20s, wearing jeans, sneakers, and a thin t-shirt, completely inappropriate for this kind of weather. His face was pale, almost ghostly, and his body was icy to the touch. I helped him inside, propping him up in a wooden chair by the fire. He didn't say a word. He just sat there, motionless, either too tired or too confused to speak. I figured he'd gotten lost, maybe wandered off after drinking too much in town. I made him a hot cup of tea, hoping it would warm him up. While I was in the kitchen, heating up some soup and grabbing bread, I thought about where I could set him up for the night. When I came back a few minutes later, the chair was empty. He was gone. I searched the house, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. Panicked, I threw on my boots and jacket and went outside. The wind was howling, and the rain made it almost impossible to see. I stumbled down the road, shouting his name into the storm. Then, in the distance, I saw flashing lights, about a mile up the road. I made my way toward them. When I got there, I saw the town police cruiser and the ambulance. The officer was peering into a ditch by the side of the road. I called out, and he turned toward me. He explained that there had been a car accident about 45 minutes earlier. A man had driven off the road and died instantly. I told him about the strange visitor at my house. The officer didn't seem too concerned. He said he'd take a look around but figured the man had just regained consciousness and wandered off, embarrassed. I returned to the farmhouse, still chilled to the bone, but relieved to be out of the storm. I crawled back into bed, convincing myself it would all make sense in the morning. A few days later, the local paper arrived. I sat down with my coffee, flipping through it until I froze on the second page. There, staring back at me, was the face of the man who'd knocked on my door. The headline read, "Man Killed in Car Accident." The article explained that the man, from Columbus, had been staying in Pine Lake with his girlfriend. That stormy night, she had ended their relationship. Heartbroken, he'd left her house, jumped into his car, and driven off toward town. His car had left the road, crashing into the ditch, killing him instantly. The police estimated the time of the accident at around 9:00 p.m., at least half an hour before he'd appeared at my doorstep. I no longer dismiss ghost stories. Some things can't be explained, and that night I was visited by something far beyond this world. This happened to me and my family during one of our trips to a little cabin deep in the woods. It might sound like a spooky story you'd hear around a campfire, but I swear to you, this is real. Picture it. A long, dusty road winding through thick woods, the leaves of autumn swirling around us. My dad's at the wheel, and we come across a rusted gate blocking the way. Just two metal bars, a chain, and a padlock that's seen better days. My mom gets out, unlocking the gate with a sharp creak, and we continue down the rough road, bumping along for what feels like half a mile before we finally spot the cabin. Now, this isn't the type of cozy cabin you might imagine. It's old, weathered, and has a certain eerie vibe to it. The front of the cabin is symmetrical but sagging, with a porch that looks like it could fall apart any minute. Two dusty windows stare out at us, and the door is barely hanging on its hinges. Above the door, there's an old deer skull mounted on the wall, its hollow eyes following your every move. A woodpile sits nearby with an axe embedded in the chopping block. It's clear this cabin has been around for decades, maybe even over a century. Inside, it doesn't get any better. The first floor is open and spacious except for a small bathroom tucked to the right. There's a bed off to one side, a couch facing a blackened fireplace, and behind that, what could barely be called a kitchen, just a stove, a fridge, and a chopping block. The walls are lined with taxidermy, rabbits, squirrels, quail, even a rattlesnake skin stretched out like some grim trophy. My uncle, a big hunter, is the kind of guy who keeps the heads and throws away the rest. Above us is a loft that could be mistaken for an attic. You need to climb a ladder to reach it. There are two old mattresses up there, along with a pile of worn-out Christmas decorations. There's no real light up there, just a tiny window close to the ground, barely a foot and a half off the floor. That's the cabin. It feels alive in its silence, like it's constantly watching you. We arrived late that August, around 5 p.m., exhausted from the long drive. As we unpacked the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like someone was watching me from the trees. I spun around quickly, but there was no one there. I tried to tell myself it was just the fatigue from the drive, but the uneasy feeling didn't go away. Once we were settled in, we started a fire and spent the evening the usual way: dinner, board games, and the radio playing softly in the background. Around 10 p.m., we all decided to turn in. My parents climbed up into the loft, but I still felt on edge. That weird sensation hadn't gone away, and I couldn't bring myself to sleep up there. So I dragged my blankets to the couch in front of the fire and settled in. I slept peacefully for a while, but just before 1 a.m., I was woken up by a faint scratching sound coming from the front door. At first, I thought it might be the wind or a branch scraping the wood, but then it got louder and louder. Soon, it was so loud that my parents woke up, annoyed, and called down to me, telling me to stop messing around and go to sleep. I was frozen in fear, unable to respond. The scratching didn't stop. It only grew more frantic, more desperate, until it felt like the door itself was alive with the sound. My dad climbed down the ladder, irritated, ready to scold me for waking them. But when he reached the bottom, he saw me huddled under the blankets on the couch, too scared to move. His frustration faded into concern, and he told me to follow him to check out whatever was making the noise. The closer we got to the door, the louder the scratching became. My dad gripped the handle, turned it slowly, and yanked the door open. Nothing. The sound stopped immediately. There was no one there, just the pitch-black night and the chorus of crickets from the woods. We stared at each other, confused, before shutting the door behind us. The next morning, we checked the door for any marks or scratches, anything that could explain what we'd heard. But there was nothing. No signs of claws, no scuff marks, not a scratch in sight. It was like the whole thing had never happened. Now, every August, we make our way back to my uncle's cabin. It's become a family tradition, and every time we go, we secretly hope to hear that strange scratching again, but we never do. Still, I'll never forget that night, and I'll never stop wondering what, or who, was trying to get in. When I was about 6 or 7, my family lived in an old farmhouse in a quiet town in Missouri. It was one of those classic farmhouses from the 1920s, with creaky wooden floors and rooms full of history. Many homes in that area had their own eerie tales, but the story of what happened to me in that house has stayed with me ever since. It's something I'll never forget. At that age, having an imaginary friend was pretty common, and I had one too. Her name was Emily. She had long brown hair, pulled back with a faded ribbon, and wore an old-fashioned dress, one that seemed to belong in the early 1900s. The dress was simple but elegant, with lace at the hem in a light blue tint, almost as if it had faded with age. She also wore long socks and old-fashioned black shoes. To me, Emily was just as real as anyone I knew, and I felt completely comfortable around her. We spent so much time together. My older brother teased me about Emily, calling her my ghost friend, but I never let it bother me. I was sure he had his own imaginary friends when he was younger. He just didn't remember them anymore. One night, it was the night before my first day of school, and my mom put us to bed early. She always wanted us well rested before the big day. My parents stayed up late, watching TV in the living room. I remember the house being unusually still, the air thick with quiet anticipation. At some point, while everyone was asleep, my mom noticed a light coming down the stairs. She thought it was one of us sneaking out of bed, but when she called, "Get back to bed," the light didn't stop. It kept descending the staircase, almost as if it had its own purpose. Mom was sitting on the couch with my dad asleep beside her. As the light grew brighter, spilling across the stairwell, she became uneasy. It wasn't just a glow, it was something more. She watched as it reached the bottom of the stairs and turned the corner, heading directly toward the antique cabinet near the base. That cabinet was filled with old family heirlooms, things that had been passed down from generations. The light paused in front of the cabinet. Then, the shape became clearer. It wasn't just a glowing orb. It was a figure, a person, tall and thin, its presence almost peaceful. It moved toward the cabinet and reached out, pointing at a particular book on the shelf. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. My mom sat frozen in place, her heart racing. She couldn't even bring herself to wake my dad. Instead, she grabbed his arm and whispered, "We're going to bed. I can't stay here anymore." The next morning, after a restless night, my mom decided to investigate. I was standing beside her as she opened the curio cabinet. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled out the book the figure had pointed to. It was old, its pages yellowed and brittle, and when she opened it, one page seemed to open on its own. On that page, there was a photograph of a little girl. She had dark, curly hair, tied with a faded ribbon, and wore a light-colored dress, just like Emily. Under the photograph was a name, Emily Price. The caption explained how she had tragically died in a car accident when she was my age. The book described her life in our town, where she had lived just a few blocks from our home. The collection of stories was about local children who had passed, but Emily's stood out. From that day forward, I never saw Emily again. I don't know if she was connected to our house or if she had lived nearby, but I can't shake the feeling that she was real. Even now, as an adult, I sometimes wonder if Emily will ever come back. It's a strange thought, but I miss her. I can't fully explain what happened, but I believe she wasn't just a figment of my imagination. She was something more, something beyond what I understood at that time. And maybe, just maybe, one day, she'll come back. This is a true story that happened to me about 3 months ago, and I've never quite been the same since. I live in a small town called Pine Lake, surrounded by dense forests and quiet fields. It's a peaceful place where I've lived my whole life. But that night, everything changed. For the first time, I was truly afraid of where I live. I have 5 sisters, and one night they all went out to dinner to celebrate my sister Sarah's birthday. I stayed home because I was recovering from chickenpox and didn't want to be seen in public covered in red bumps. With the house to myself, I decided to rent a few movies and spend the night relaxing with some horror films. What I didn't expect was that the night would take a turn far scarier than anything on the screen. It all started while I was deep into one of the films. I suddenly heard one of my 3 dogs barking, but this wasn't unusual. Sometimes possums scurry across the roof, and the dogs always react. But this time there was only one dog barking. That was strange. I thought maybe the other 2 had gotten out of the yard. So I got up, turned on the porch light, and called their names a few times. But oddly, Tosh, the dog that had been barking, had gone completely silent. Tosh is a German shepherd, and he's usually very protective, so his sudden quietness made me uneasy. I walked around the side of the house, where the porch light couldn't reach, and called for the dogs again. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart past a tree, a light brown coat. Relieved, I thought it was one of the dogs, but when I called out, it didn't respond. I figured the dog had found something interesting, maybe a bone, and I went back inside. About 10 minutes later, as I tried to get back into my movie, I heard a scraping sound at the door. At first, I thought it was one of the dogs scratching to be let in, so I ignored it. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, almost frantic. I walked to the door and opened it, but there was nothing there. I closed the door, locked it, and barely had time to take a few steps before the scraping started again. That's when I started to feel the first waves of real fear. I turned off the movie, deciding to distract myself by going online. I checked my messages on social media, wondering why my parents hadn't returned yet. They had said they wouldn't be long, but it was already 1 a.m., and I was starting to get worried. I decided to call it a night. I turned off my computer, pulled the blankets up, and tried to sleep. But then, the sensor light outside began flickering on and off every 5 minutes, as if something was triggering it. I tried to ignore it, but just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It sounded like a dog yelping in pain, long and drawn out, but somehow unnatural. I froze, wide awake in my bed, too scared to move. My window was cracked open, and the thought that something might climb through it sent shivers down my spine. Slowly, I reached for the phone on my nightstand and dragged it under the covers with me. With trembling hands, I dialed my mom's number, praying the beeps wouldn't be loud enough to attract whatever was outside. When she answered, I could barely keep my voice steady. I asked where she was and when they'd be home. She told me they were about 10 minutes away. I stayed frozen in my bed, clutching the phone, until I finally heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway. I ran to the door, but I didn't unlock it until I saw her. When she came in, the first thing she asked was if I knew what had happened to the dogs. Confused, I said no. She explained that a friend of hers who lived about 20 minutes away had called. The friend had seen all 3 of our dogs walking past her house and had taken them into her backyard. She called Mom to let her know and kept the dogs safe until she could pick them up. This meant the dogs hadn't been home at all while Mom was gone. The next morning, I went outside to see if I could find anything unusual. Under my bedroom window on the wooden frame, I found deep bite marks, impressions that didn't match anything I'd seen before. The marks were clear, like something had tried to get through. I still don't know what happened that night. I haven't heard strange sounds since, but I don't stay home alone anymore. Whatever it was, it left a mark on me, both in the wood and in my mind. Let me start by saying that my house has always felt different. For as long as I can remember, strange things have happened here that I just can't explain. My family has noticed them too, but today I'll stick to my own experiences. When I was a little kid, I once asked my mom if I could dress like the girl upstairs. To this day, I'm not sure if it was a dream or something else, but that memory always fell off. Every time I try to remember what she looked like, one image comes to mind. A cartoonish little girl, like something you'd see on old TV shows, skipping up the stairs to my room. She was wearing a faded green dress with big red dots all over it. It felt wrong, like I was seeing something I shouldn't. One Saturday night, I decided to see if I could make contact with the spirits I felt lived in the house. I was sitting on the couch, just thinking quietly to myself, if you want to show yourselves, do something around midnight. Later that night, after I'd finished watching Saturday Night Live, it was just past midnight. I was painting in the kitchen when I heard distinct footsteps coming from the far end of the balcony, near my bedroom. The strange thing, that part of the balcony was filled with piles of junk. There was no way anything solid could have walked through there. But the footsteps were so clear, so real. Then, one summer night in August, I had an experience I'll never forget. It was about 1 a.m, and I was getting ready to go to bed. I was still in my denim shorts, so I decided to take them off to get comfortable. As I rolled onto my back to pull them down, I suddenly noticed something at the foot of my bed. It looked like a completely black figure, dressed in what seemed like a monk's robe, with the hood pulled low. It glided silently across the foot of my bed and vanished into the wall on my right. I know it wasn't sleep paralysis. I could move just fine. But that figure, it was enough to send chills down my spine. More recently, I had another odd experience. One night, I rolled over in bed for no particular reason and noticed a faint glow near the ceiling. It stuck there for what felt like forever, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me. Eventually, I fell asleep, but that feeling of being watched lingered long after. Now this next story is a bit lighter, even a little funny, I guess. One night, I was watching a rerun of Saturday Night Live. It was an episode I'd already seen, but one of my favorite singers was performing, so I didn't mind watching it again. While the show was on, I was making paper snowflakes for the windows. At one point, I got up to throw something in the trash. As I walked into the kitchen, I kept singing along to the song, knowing most of the lyrics by heart. But something felt off. My voice didn't quite match the music I was hearing. I went back into the living room, and when I saw the TV, I froze. The channel had switched from 4 to 8, and a different singer, one I liked but not as much, was performing. The remote was moved too. It wasn't where I'd left it. It was slightly off to the side. It seems one of the spirits in my house has the same taste in music but prefers a different artist. That's all I have for now about the ghosts in my house. I promise these stories are true, even if they're not the scariest you've ever heard. Still, I hope you found them interesting. And who knows, maybe there's more to come in the future. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? There's a chilling tale that's been passed down through my family for years. One about a hospital not too far from where we live in Pine Lake, Missouri. My uncle worked in the maintenance department there, and one night something happened that not only cost him his job, but also left a scar on him that lasted for the rest of his life. As a kid, I would beg him to tell me the story, but he never shared it easily. Whenever he did, it was like he was slipping into a trance. His voice turned cold and distant, as though the memory wasn't his anymore. More like it was something dragged from the darkest recesses of his mind, a place he'd rather not visit. Eventually, my aunt put an end to it, forbidding him to tell it at all. When he first started working at the hospital, there was one room in the psychiatric wing that seemed off. It was always locked, never used, and whenever my uncle asked about it, his coworkers either brushed him off or quickly changed the subject. It was as though no one wanted to acknowledge its existence. One late evening, my uncle was replacing a light bulb in the hallway near that mysterious room. He had just finished installing the bulb and was starting to climb down the ladder when, to his surprise, the light flickered and went out again. As he stood there in the dim light, he felt the air around him turn cold, the kind of cold that sank into your bones. And then he smelled it, a thick, choking stench, like the kind you'd find in a musty basement after years of neglect. To replace the bulb, he had to walk past that door. The closer he got, the stronger the smell became. And then he heard it. A sound. At first, it was soft, like a lullaby sung from far away. But then it twisted, turning into something darker, something that made his skin crawl. A low, unnatural mumbling. And then he heard a voice. Raymond, it called, frail yet unmistakable. Help me, Raymond. You're the only one who can help me now. I'm in here. Hurry, please. It was his grandmother's voice. But that was impossible. She'd been dead for more than 20 years. His heart skipped. His breath caught. He stood frozen in place, overwhelmed by the mix of sadness, confusion, and fear. Tears streamed down his face, and he couldn't move. That's where the sound changed. A low, mocking laugh echoed from the other side of the door. It started off faint, but then it grew, louder and more sinister, until it filled the whole corridor. It wasn't human. In a daze, my uncle reached for the doorknob. The second his hand touched it, a searing pain shot through his palm. He yanked his hand away and found a crescent-shaped burn starting to form on his skin, a mark that would stay with him forever. Before he could react, the doorknob began to twist by itself. Slowly at first, then faster, until the entire door rattled as if something, no, someone, was trying to break through. The mocking laughter grew louder, closer, almost as if it was right behind him. He didn't dare look back. Terrified, he sprinted down the hall, his legs almost giving out as the sound followed him, growing more frantic. When he finally reached the nurse's station, he collapsed. The world went dark. When he woke, a group of nurses and staff were gathered around him, one of them tending to the burn on his hand. My uncle, shaking, told them what happened. 2 orderlies were sent to check it out, but neither of them wanted to go alone. When they came back, one of them didn't say a word. He just grabbed his coat and left the building, never to return. The other orderly said everything seemed normal, except for the ladder, still where my uncle had left it, and the light bulb now working perfectly. A few days later, the orderly who had quit called my uncle. He confessed that he'd heard the same voice, someone he loved, calling from behind the locked door. He'd felt the same overwhelming rush of emotion, too. That's when my uncle knew he couldn't stay. But when he tried to hand in his resignation, his supervisor fired him on the spot and told him never to speak of it again. Years later, when I think about his story, one thing always stands out. My uncle passed away long before any big movies about demonic possessions came out. He never saw any of those films. He didn't even know about them. But whatever he encountered that night, it left no doubt in his mind. It wasn't from this world. I'd like to begin by saying how much I've enjoyed this site. Since discovering it a few months ago, I've spent countless moments reading every story posted. After finishing them all, I decided to share my own experience. While it might not be the most dramatic, I think it's still worth telling. When I was 15, my family moved from Cleveland, Ohio, to a small town called Pine Lake. We settled into a nice house there. My parents, older sister, younger brother, grandmother, and I. The house was cozy, though it only had 4 bedrooms. Because of this, my uncles converted part of the basement into a room for me. They worked hard to turn half of it into a cozy, paneled bedroom, complete with a decent-sized closet. The only thing I didn't like was the doors. Both the entrance to my room and the closet had those bifold, slatted doors that creaked loudly whenever opened. You could see light and movement through the slats, which always made me feel uneasy at night. I didn't think much of it at the time, but that small detail became crucial later on. At first, everything seemed normal. That is, until I made the mistake of playing with an Ouija board. I know Ouija stories are common, but this is just a small part of what happened. One night, I decided to use the board by myself. It didn't seem to work, and nothing unusual happened at the time, so I gave up. But after that night, strange things began happening in my room. As I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, I would hear the unmistakable creak of my bedroom door opening, followed by the sound of footsteps crossing the carpet. The room would be pitch black, and I couldn't see anything. but the sounds were so clear that they froze me in place with fear. I told my parents about it the next day, but they didn't believe me. They'd never entertained talk of the supernatural. I ended up sleeping on the couch in the family room for the next few nights, too scared to stay in the basement. When I finally found the courage to return to my room, the same thing happened. The creaking door, the footsteps. There was another strange occurrence involving the basement light. The switch to turn it on was at the top of the stairs, but when I flipped it, nothing happened. Not wanting to walk down into the pitch-black basement, I called for my mom. Of course, when she tried the switch, the light came on without issue. It felt like the house was toying with me, and as a scared teenager, I didn't know how to handle it. After a few nights of this, I finally snapped. When I heard the footsteps again, I yelled, "Would you just get out of my room?" To my shock, the footsteps moved back toward the door, and I heard it creak shut. After that, the activity stopped. I threw the Ouija board away, and thankfully, nothing like that happened again. But that wasn't the end of the strange experiences in the house. About a year later, my sister brought her new boyfriend over. They were alone in the house, and she was showing him around when he froze at the staircase leading to the bedrooms. He stared at the stairs, his face pale. He told my sister he saw a woman in a beautiful wedding gown walking down the steps. She wore a veil, so he couldn't see her face, but the sight left him visibly shaken. When my mother and grandmother came home shortly after, my sister asked her boyfriend to tell them what he'd seen. To everyone's surprise, my grandmother admitted that she'd seen the exact same thing when they first toured the house before moving in. She hadn't told anyone because she didn't want to scare us kids. We never learned who the woman might have been. The house wasn't old, maybe 40 or 50 years, and we were only the second or third owners. To this day, the mystery remains unsolved. Years later, in 1996, I moved back home after my divorce, bringing my 3-year-old child with me. My mom gave us one of the upstairs bedrooms to share. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then, in 1999, as I began looking for a new place to live, strange things started happening again, this time in the main bathroom. Every time I showered, I placed my towel on the toilet seat for easy access. But when I finished, the towel would always be on the floor. At first, I thought I must have placed it too close to the edge, but after being extra careful and still finding it on the floor, I grew uneasy. The bathroom door was locked, and the window was closed due to the air conditioning, so there was no logical explanation. One day, I decided to speak up. Before I got in the shower, I said, "Now I don't want to see that towel on the floor when I get out." Sure enough, the towel stayed in place, but when I looked over, a small basket of flowers that sat on the toilet tank was on the floor instead. That was the final straw for me. I moved out shortly after. My mother claims nothing strange has ever happened in the house, but my brother has shared a few experiences of his own. Maybe one day he'll share them here too. Thanks for reading, and I hope you enjoyed this long, winding tale of my ghostly encounters. This story takes place in 1992 during my first year of college. I was 18 and my boyfriend Daniel, now my husband, was 20. We were both attending the same small university, nestled in a quiet town in the Midwest. Daniel was the student director of the theater department, and his office was tucked away upstairs, right behind the stage. The theater itself was old, with high ceilings and seating for about 300 people. One afternoon, as we were leaving his office and walking past the stage door, we noticed something strange. There, in the middle of the stage, was a bird, sitting under a yellow spotlight. Another spotlight, a white one, shone from the back of the theater, casting a beam on the front of the stage. The rest of the theater was completely dark, and there was no one else in the building, not in the seating area, the stage, or the lighting booth. It felt unnervingly still. Daniel carefully picked up the bird and let it outside. As we said our goodbyes, he joked, "Wouldn't it be weird if that yellow spotlight turned off when I walked by?" We both laughed it off and went our separate ways, me to art class, and him back to his office. Later, Daniel came running to find me after class, looking both excited and spooked. He explained that when he passed the stage door again, the yellow spotlight had turned off. Curious, he had walked onto the stage and started speaking aloud, almost as if addressing any spirits or ghosts that might be there. As he spoke, the yellow spotlight flickered back on, shining directly on him. He checked the entire lighting booth thoroughly. No one was there. During his conversation with the lights, Daniel had mentioned me, saying how he wanted me to see what was happening. That's when a red spotlight flicked on next to the yellow one. Some might have thought the red light was a warning, a sign of no, but Daniel had connected it to me because of my red hair. Before leaving the stage, he said goodbye to the lights, and as if in response, they turned off. When Daniel told me about it, I decided to check it out for myself. When I arrived at the stage door, only the red spotlight was on, almost like it was waiting for me. Gathering my courage, I stepped inside. I started speaking, much like Daniel had, and when I mentioned his name, the yellow spotlight came on again. The whole experience felt surreal, eerie, yet incredible. For the rest of that semester, Daniel and I would occasionally visit the darkened theater, and the lights would always respond to us, almost as if the spirits recognized us. Each time we left, the lights would turn off. But one particular day, things escalated further than ever before. The house lights were on, as the janitor had just finished cleaning. I was standing at the back of the theater, near the audience seating, when I noticed a small, square yellow spotlight shining on the stage. As I moved closer, the square faded, and the familiar yellow spotlight switched on. This time, it was joined by 2 white spotlights and 2 pink ones, lined up side by side. Then finally, my red light came on. I stood frozen at the edge of the stage, overwhelmed by what I was seeing. I felt a strange pull, as though something was silently urging me to step onto the stage and play with the lights, but I was too scared. As I began to back away, the white spotlight from the booth at the back of the theater suddenly clicked on, shining directly on me. It was as if the spirits wanted to keep me there. I managed to stammer out that I needed to leave, and as I backed away from the stage, the lights began to turn off, one by one. The timing was so precise that it felt as though the spirits were saying goodbye. Daniel graduated that semester, and we moved on with our lives. But years later, in November, we returned to visit family during Thanksgiving. Daniel decided to stop by the old theater. This time, the lights didn't respond to him. However, as he was leaving, he swears he saw something dart away, like a figure trying to stay hidden in the shadows. He believes the spirit had been watching him, only revealing itself as he was walking away. Even now, after all these years, I still get chills thinking about it. I know this story might sound unbelievable, but it's 100% true. Sometimes, I even find it hard to believe it happened myself, and I was there. Thanks for reading, and I hope you enjoyed my story. These events took place back in 1996, when I was about 13 years old and living with my mom in a quiet town in North Carolina. We had moved into my grandparents' old farmhouse the year before, nestled on the edge of a secluded forest. Growing up, I had always been intrigued by the ghost stories my family shared, tales of spirits roaming the woods and eerie happenings around the house. At the time, I chalked it all up to overactive imaginations and old superstitions. That was before the strange events began, the kind that would keep me awake in terror, night after night. Our home was modest, and my mom and I shared a bedroom on the opposite side of the house from my grandparents. Our room had an old wooden door that led out to a small porch overlooking the dark forest. The trees loomed large in the night, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch forever. The woods were thick, and the air was always cool, even in summer. At night, the silence was so heavy, it felt suffocating. We always left a small nightlight on by the bed to cut through the darkness. One night around 2 a.m., I was jerked awake by a sharp, thunderous clap that rang out through the room. It was so loud, so sudden, that I couldn't comprehend it at first. I opened my eyes and glanced over at my mom, who was stirring awake as well. I asked her if she had clapped, even though I knew it wasn't her. The sound had come from somewhere else in the room. She looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "It wasn't me." That's when the atmosphere in the room shifted. Everything felt heavier, like something unseen had settled in. We both turned toward the corner where the sound had come from, an unsettling mixture of confusion and dread creeping over us. We lay there, the tension thick between us, whispering nervously for about half an hour before sleep claimed us again. But the night was far from over. Hours later, I woke up to find my mom standing by the bedroom door, her face ashen. Her eyes were wide with fear as she quickly shut the door. She told me she had woken to find the door wide open, despite us making sure it was closed before bed. Everyone else in the house was sound asleep, completely unaware. Not long after that, my mom gently shook me awake again, this time whispering urgently for me to listen. I strained my ears and heard faint voices coming from just outside our door, in the dining room. It sounded like a group of people talking in hushed tones, as if they were trying to keep quiet so we wouldn't hear them. My mom and I lay frozen, listening for what seemed like forever, until she slowly opened the door. As soon as the door creaked open, the voices stopped. The hallway outside was empty. Things grew more unsettling as the night went on. Around 3:30 a.m., I heard my grandfather's voice from the living room, calling out, "Hold on, I'm coming." Someone had been ringing the front doorbell repeatedly and shouting, "It's me. Let me in." My grandfather thought it might be our neighbor from down the road, someone who often came by in the middle of the night. But why would she come over at that hour? By then, I was already terrified from everything that had happened. I begged my grandfather not to open the door, urging him to check through the window first. He didn't listen. When he opened the door, there was no one there. Whoever, or whatever, had been ringing the doorbell had vanished into the night. It wasn't our neighbor, and it wasn't anyone we knew. Shaken and exhausted, we all returned to bed, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. Later that night, I heard noises coming from the bathroom attached to our room. The light was off, but the door was wide open. It sounded like something was being knocked over, objects shifting and scraping across the floor. Then I saw something that made my heart freeze, shadows flickering in and out of the bathroom doorway, like someone was playing peekaboo. My body went cold, and before I could even think, I jumped out of bed and crawled into my mom's, terrified to sleep alone for the rest of the night. When dawn finally broke, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, as if the sunlight itself had chased away the lingering fear. It was the first time I had ever felt so grateful for a new day. Not long after that night, we moved back up to New York, leaving the farmhouse and its haunted memories behind. But even to this day, I can't shake the feeling of what happened in that quiet house in North Carolina. It was in 1968 when my parents bought that old house. It wasn't just any house. It had an unsettling history, with records showing it was built in the late 1800s. It was the kind of place that seemed to have a story of its own. After we moved in, my mom, barely a week into living there, turned to my dad and said, "I wish we'd never bought this place." It didn't take long for us to realize exactly why she felt that way. I was born there in 1970 and spent 25 years of my life in that house. But even after all those years, I don't miss it. I don't long for it the way some people do about the place they grew up in. In fact, I'm almost relieved to have left it behind. What's left are memories I wish I could erase, experiences I'm better off forgetting. But I digress. Let me tell you about the scariest night I had there, one I'll never forget. I was about 8 or 9 years old. It was a school night, so I went to bed earlier than my 3 brothers. At the time, my brother Brian had the room in the attic. My younger brother Jeff slept in the middle bedroom, and my older brother had already moved out. Lucky him. Even at that age, I wasn't shy about admitting I needed the hallway light on to sleep. There was something about that house, something in the air, that made it feel different, almost alive. The light helped calm me, helped ease my mind. That night, I could faintly hear the TV playing downstairs, so when I first heard footsteps, I figured it was one of my brothers coming up the stairs. But then, something was off. The TV didn't get louder like it usually did when the door to the stairs opened. Instead, The footsteps seemed to be coming from the attic. I froze, listening hard. The footsteps creaked down the attic stairs, then moved along the hallway, stopping right at my bedroom door. My room didn't have a solid door. My dad had taken it off because it kept hitting the bed when it swung in. In its place, my mom had hung a curtain for privacy. That meant I could always see shadows when someone stood in the hallway. And there it was, the shadow of a figure standing in front of me. At first, I thought it was one of my brothers, playing a prank. "Brian?" I whispered. No answer. "Jeff? Stop messing around." Still, nothing. Not even the sound of breathing. A deep chill washed over me. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying as hard as I could. When I opened them again, the shadow was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief, but it didn't last. A few minutes passed, and then the footsteps returned. This time, I was too terrified to speak, to even move. The sound of the TV downstairs was still there, and the stair door was shut, so no one could have heard me call out. The footsteps crept down the attic stairs, across the hallway, and stopped at my doorway again. But this time, I was frozen in place, too scared to even flinch. Eventually, my parents and brothers came upstairs to their rooms, and the footsteps stopped. I didn't say a word that night. I was just glad someone else was finally on the same floor as me. I said a prayer, hoping for peace, and somehow managed to drift off to sleep. The next morning, I told my mom about what had happened. She listened intently, then we prayed together. After that, it never happened again, at least not to me. Years passed, and one day, a man came to our house asking if we were interested in selling. He wanted to remodel it, flip it. My mom remembered his last name and realized his family had lived there before us. As they spoke, he told her something unsettling. He and his brother had shared the same back bedroom I had. One night, when they were supposed to be asleep, they decided to play with their race car track instead. They shut the door to keep the sound from their parents. But then, they heard someone jiggle the doorknob. Thinking it was their dad, they quickly jumped into bed. After a moment of silence, they heard footsteps in the hallway, and the doorknob jiggled again. One of the brothers rushed to the door, thinking to surprise their dad. But when he opened it, no one was there. The hallway was empty. Terrified, they ran downstairs, only to find their parents sitting calmly in the living room, watching TV. When they told their father what happened, he simply said, "Boys, your mother and I have been sitting here all night. Neither of us has been upstairs." Hearing that sent chills through me. Those boys had experienced the same thing I had. The footsteps, the presence at the door. But with one key difference. They had a door, while I only had a curtain. The details were different, but the fear was the same. That house still holds so many mysteries, but I'm glad I don't live there anymore. Even now, the memory of that shadow at my doorway haunts me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can still hear the faint sound of footsteps. In the summer of 1994, just before my freshman year of high school, life took a turn I never expected. My best friend, Emily, was off on a vacation with her dad and stepmom in the mountains of Colorado. The distance felt like more than just miles. It felt like a whole different world. It was the first summer without her, and the emptiness was overwhelming. To cope with the loneliness, I spent a lot of time with my new horse, Rusty. Rusty was more than just a horse to me. He was my dream come true. My parents had promised me a big reward for doing well in school that year, and I chose a horse. I'd worked so hard all through 8th grade, and when summer finally arrived, Rusty became mine. He was a companion like no other, patient, kind, and always there when I needed him. Recently, I lost him, but that's another story for another time. As the summer dragged on, I couldn't wait for Emily to return so I could show her Rusty. She had always loved horses, and I knew she'd fall in love with him the moment she saw him. But on August 15th, 1994, everything changed. I was sitting in the living room, watching TV with my mom and little brother on a warm afternoon, when the phone rang. The words I heard on the other end of the line shattered everything I knew. Emily had died in a car crash. Her dad and his girlfriend survived, but Emily was gone. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't even cry at first, just a numbness that spread through me. The following weeks blurred together in a haze of grief. I tried to focus on school, on spending time with Rusty, but it all felt empty. A piece of my heart was gone. One night, after a long day at the barn, I finally fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. That's when something truly bizarre happened. I woke up, not in my bed, but in Rusty's stall in the dim light of the barn. And there, standing in front of me, was Emily. She looked just like I remembered, alive, happy, and full of energy. There was no sense of dread or sadness, no thoughts of her tragic accident. It was as though nothing had changed. We were just two best friends, reunited for the first time in what felt like forever. We talked about Rusty, and she said she wanted to go for a ride. Without hesitation, I agreed. We saddled him up and rode out into the open arena, laughing, talking, and catching up as if nothing had ever happened. We didn't mention her death or the pain it caused. It was just the two of us, together again, sharing our stories. The air was cool and smelled of hay and horses, and the sounds of the stable felt like music. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. But then, Emily said it was time for her to go. I hugged her tight, not wanting to let go. She smiled, waved, and then, just like that, she was gone. I blinked, and the next thing I knew, I was lying back in my bed, in the silence of the night. Confusion washed over me. Had that really happened? Had I just seen Emily again? Later that day, I went to the barn like I always did. When I stepped inside Rusty's stall, I noticed something strange. The halter, which I'd left hanging on the hook the night before, was now neatly placed on the upper hook by the stall door. And Rusty's blankets, which I had folded carefully and placed on him, were no longer on him. They were lying in a heap on the floor. No one had been in the stall besides me, except when the horses were fed. I stood frozen, staring at the halter and blankets. It felt like a dream, but I wasn't scared. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace, almost like Emily had come back, just for that one last ride. As if she had wanted to say goodbye, one final time, before moving on. Even now, I believe it was Emily. It may sound unbelievable, but I know what I experienced. And I'm thankful, in some strange way, that I got to see her again, even if it was only for a short while. What do you think happened next? Do you think it was just a dream, or was there something more to it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. It was the week before Thanksgiving when this unsettling experience happened. I remember it so clearly because we were celebrating the arrival of my aunt's newest addition to her family, a healthy baby boy. The party was held at a cozy restaurant my aunt had just opened in our small town. The restaurant was located in an old, two-story building on a quiet, cobblestone street, and since it was late at night, we had the entire place to ourselves. The evening passed quickly in a whirlwind of laughter and celebration, but as the party began to wind down, one of my cousins, Ben, asked me to walk with him to the restroom. He was too nervous to go up to the second floor alone since that's where the restrooms were located. My aunt had given us a key to the door that led up to the second floor offices. It was a place that was usually locked at night, as it was far from the dining area and left untouched by staff after hours. The upstairs was dark and quiet, a perfect setting for something unsettling. With a reluctant sigh, I agreed, and we made our way up the old wooden staircase. The atmosphere felt thick, almost oppressive, and a strange chill made the air feel heavier as we climbed higher. We exchanged uneasy glances, the hair on the back of our necks standing up. By the time we reached the top, we were both on edge. I slipped the key into the lock, turned it, and slowly pushed the door open. But what we saw inside made us freeze in place. Just a few feet from us stood a man dressed in all white. His clothes were old-fashioned, and he looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s. His pale skin seemed almost ghostly in the dim light. For a long moment, neither of us moved, frozen by the shock of what we were seeing. Then, as if some unspoken agreement passed between us, we turned and ran as fast as we could, tearing down the stairs, our hearts pounding in our chests. When we rushed back into the party, we tried to tell everyone what had happened, but no one believed us. They laughed, brushing it off as an overactive imagination. "You two are such wimps," my cousin Linda teased. "I'll show you there's nothing upstairs. You probably just saw shadows or something." She had no idea what was about to unfold. With a knowing smile, Linda led the way as we climbed the stairs again, her footsteps echoing in the quiet building. But as we neared the top, I suddenly remembered. I hadn't locked the door when we ran out. Even though we weren't planning to go back in, I needed to lock it. We climbed the stairs again, our footsteps heavy in the silence. Linda, undeterred, insisted on checking for herself. But when I tried the door, it wouldn't open. It was locked. I stared at the door in confusion, my heart pounding. I had the key in my pocket, and I knew I hadn't locked it when we ran. Linda's bravado evaporated in an instant. Without a word, we turned and sprinted back downstairs, terror sinking in with every step. Though Linda hadn't seen the man in white, the locked door was enough to convince her that something wasn't right. Whatever was upstairs didn't want us there. A month later, I went back to the restaurant and decided to ask my aunt about the second floor. I casually brought it up, wondering if she knew anything about the area. Her response took my breath away. She told me about the man who had worked upstairs. He had been a pharmacist in the old office above the restaurant. He was in his early 40s when he passed away from cancer 5 years ago. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The man we had seen was the exact same age and description she had given. It was impossible to ignore the eerie coincidence. To this day, I still feel a chill run down my spine whenever I think about that night, and the figure in white who made sure we didn't stay too long. This story took place in 1992 in the small, quiet town of Silver Springs, Oregon, where I lived at the time. Back then, I had a Belgian Malinois named Clarissa. She was a dog of unmatched strength and loyalty, and although she was a breed known for its intelligence and agility, Clarissa's fierce temperament and strong guarding instincts made her a challenge to live with in an apartment. But despite her rough edges, she was a dog who would defend anyone she cared about. There was one night when she fought off 2 Rottweilers that had broken free from their yard and attacked us on a dark, quiet street. Clarissa didn't hesitate. She fought them off single-handedly. I ran a small auto repair shop near an old, 2-story house that had been in my family for generations. The house had a long history, having been built back in the late 1800s. It had served as a boarding house in the 1920s, but by the time I came into the picture, it had been abandoned for years. My grandmother had passed away in the late 70s, and the house has sat empty after that. My father tried to rent out the rooms, but tenants never lasted. There were rumors, whispers of strange occurrences. People spoke of doors opening by themselves, the sound of a baby crying when no children were around, and a constant feeling of being watched. One night, I was sitting in the back office of the house, working on my computer. I had left the door open to let some fresh air in, hoping to clear out the lingering scent of cigarette smoke. It was late, about 11 p.m., and Clarissa was lying at my feet, fast asleep. Out of nowhere, my computer screen flickered, then went completely blank. All the words I'd been typing disappeared, leaving only the letters GH on the screen. I hadn't typed those letters. Right then, Clarissa shot up from her sleep. She went from calm to alert in an instant, rolling low and deep, her ears pinned flat against her head. She didn't bark, but there was a certain urgency in her growl, a growl that told me she knew something was about to happen. Then she charged toward the doorway, jumping up as if aiming for something above her, something tall, something that would have been at least 6 feet tall. But there was nothing there. Clarissa collided with something I couldn't see. She hit it hard enough that she yelped, falling to the floor with a stunned whimper. She quickly recovered, scrambling back to a corner behind the desk, her growls turning into desperate barks. She lunged again toward the doorway, this time, twice in a row, her body launching into the air as if to tackle whatever was there. Each time, she collided with something invisible and fell back, howling in pain. By the second attempt, Clarissa had enough. I'd never seen her so afraid. She turned and bolted for the door, yelping in terror. A sound that wasn't like anything I had ever heard from a dog before. It was almost human in its distress. I didn't hesitate. I wasn't about to stay in that building alone, not after seeing what Clarissa had seen. I grabbed my things and followed her out. When I passed through the doorway, there was nothing unusual, nothing that tried to stop me. Whatever Clarissa had encountered was gone, or maybe it simply didn't care about me. From that night on, I've told people I've never seen a ghost, but my dog certainly did. She fought one, and lost. The old house was eventually torn down, replaced by a parking lot. Plans were made to build rental apartments on the site, but when my father, who had grown up in that house, heard about it, he just said, "I hope they're ready for whatever's waiting for them." That's all he's ever said about his childhood there. After that night, I think I understand why. In the fall of 1999, I was living at my mom's house in a quiet little town called Pine Ridge, just on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't isolated, but there was a stretch of farmland behind the property, giving it that calm, secluded feel. The house itself wasn't anything special, just a modest ranch-style home my parents had settled into 3 years prior. I had recently become a new mother, and every moment felt like a whirlwind. My baby boy slept in his crib in my room at the far end of a long, dimly lit hallway. I kept a watchful eye on him, especially at night, as any new mother would. One morning in November, I woke to the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway. They came closer, then paused right outside my bedroom door before retreating back down the hall. My heart began to race. Everyone else in the house had already gone to work, and there was no way anyone could have entered without triggering the loud beeps of our security system. I reached for the phone and called my mom at work. When I explained what had just happened, there was a long silence on the other end. Then she told me something that sent a chill down my spine. That morning, as she was getting ready for work, she'd heard a sneeze coming from the living room. The only people at home at that time were my mom, my son, and me. Thinking it was me, she came to check on us but found me fast asleep and my son still peacefully napping in his crib. At first, she had dismissed it, but now, hearing my account, she wasn't so sure. That afternoon, while vacuuming the living room, something even stranger occurred. As I hummed a quiet tune, lost in thought, I glanced up. Floating right in front of me was a faint, gray, cloud-like mist. My breath caught in my throat, and I stood frozen, watching it. It lingered for only a moment before it vanished as soon as I moved. Still rattled, I collapsed onto the couch to gather myself. Trying to rationalize it, I convinced myself it was just dust kicked up by the vacuum. I started vacuuming again, but something was off. The air felt wrong, like a presence was hovering near me. I shook off the feeling, determined to push through, and continued cleaning before heading to check on my son. As I walked down the hall, my skin suddenly prickled with a deep unease. I quickened my pace, anxious to get to my son's room. And then, as I crossed a certain spot in the hall, I walked right through a cold patch of air, unnatural, like walking into a freezer. The house was warm, the heater running, so that sudden chill didn't make any sense. Then it happened again. The gray mist returned. But this time, it wasn't just a shape. It was almost human. It hung there in the hallway like a shadow, its form barely visible, but I knew it was there. Panic surged through me as I stood frozen. Gathering every ounce of courage, I screamed, "Leave me alone. I don't want you near me or my son. Quit scaring me." As soon as I shouted, I heard it, soft and faint, a whisper that chilled me to my core. "I'm sorry." Without thinking, I grabbed my son, his diaper bag, and rushed out to my car. I drove straight to my friend's house, shaking all the way there. I couldn't bear to be in that house again until my mom came home. When I told her everything, she brushed it off as just my imagination, just like she had done with the sneeze earlier that day. But I know what I experienced. There was something in that house with me. After that day, though, nothing ever happened again. Maybe it was my shouting that did the trick. Or maybe whatever it was simply decided to leave. Either way, I never saw it again, and for that, I'm grateful. Ever since I was young, my family has always been followed by strange, inexplicable occurrences. Ghosts, spirits, and eerie events seem to follow us no matter where we go. Some of the things I'm about to tell you might sound like something out of a horror movie, but I swear they're true. Some aren't even all that frightening, just bizarre. Honestly, it's become so normal for us that it hardly phases us anymore. If you've seen one ghost, you've seen them all. If you haven't, consider yourself lucky. We're a mixed family, African American, Mexican, and Native American, with a history shaped by hardship and loss. Over the years, people have whispered about witchcraft in our bloodline, though most of it's just gossip. Still, there's something about us. You could call it the sight, intuition, or maybe just bad luck, but you be the judge. When my mom was pregnant with me, a tragic accident occurred right outside our home. My parents rushed to the scene, using every towel and blanket we owned to tend to the victims. One of the drivers, clearly drunk, kept shouting, "I don't want to die." My dad tried to reassure him, saying, "You're going to be okay, man. We won't let you die." But my dad knew it was too late. His injuries were too severe. "I'm so sorry," the man said weakly. "Are the others okay?" My dad lied to comfort him. "Yeah, man, they're fine." The man quieted down, as though listening to something that wasn't there. "Oh, okay," he whispered. Then he passed away. He was wearing a worn-out fedora. I was born that spring. Not long after, my parents decided it was time to leave. Strange things had started happening in that house. Doors that opened on their own, voices coming from empty rooms, shadows that lingered in the corners. It wasn't until years later that we wondered if the man in the fedora had stayed behind. When I was 3, we lived in a tiny apartment. My crib was next to my parents' bed, and I often woke up to see my mom coming home from her night shifts. She'd do her workout routine before bed, and I liked to watch her. One night, I woke up to find her doing her stretches, but she wasn't alone. There was a man, or something like a man, standing beside her. His shape flickered like static on an old TV. "Mommy, who's that?" I asked. She froze in the middle of her stretch. "Who's who, honey?" "That man." I pointed. "He's making fun of you." Her face turned pale. "Go back to sleep," she whispered quickly. "Don't look at him. Pretend he's not there." After that, I often saw him near my crib, just watching. I learned to squeeze my eyes shut until he was gone. When I was 7, I liked to let my hair fall over the side of my bed when I slept. One night, I woke to a sharp tug on my braids. Startled, I tried to sit up, but something yanked my hair back, pinning my head to the pillow. Terrified, I screamed for my parents. As soon as they rushed in, whatever it was let go. My dad checked under the bed but found nothing. I couldn't sleep in that room alone for a long time after that. When I turned 16, my parents left town for a few weeks, and my sister and I stayed behind. For safety, my sister slept in their room, while I stayed in mine, just across the hall. One night, I woke up, and to my horror, I was being lifted off the bed. I hovered above the canopy, high enough to see the top. Then suddenly, I was dropped back onto the mattress with a jarring thud. Before I could react, something slapped me across the face. Frightened out of my mind, I ran to my sister's room, banging on the door. She let me in but was reluctant to get up. When she stepped into my room to investigate, she dropped to her knees and started praying. "Something's off in here," she said. I didn't sleep in my room again until my parents returned. When I was 19, I watched The Sixth Sense, and it scared me so badly, I started sleeping with the lights on. 2 weeks later, I woke up at 3:10 a.m. to find my lamp glowing unnaturally. The bulb shifted colors, green to blue, blue to green, and the room was suffocatingly hot. Paralyzed with fear, I bolted out of the room to find my mom. She walked in and declared, "The only spirits welcome in this house are God, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus Christ." Later, my stepdad told me that when she spoke, something cold and dark moved through their room, pressing down on him before vanishing. 6 months ago, I had a dream about a choir singing in Latin. I woke up hearing the words Salve Regina. Curious, I told my mom about it the next morning. That means pray for your salvation, she said casually. 2 weeks later, I researched the phrase at the library and confirmed her translation. But when I mentioned it again, she looked at me confused. I've never taken Latin, she said. I wouldn't have told you that. To this day, I wonder if I was really speaking to her, or something else that was pretending to be her. After 8 long years of doctors telling me I would never have a child, I finally found myself pregnant. My husband, Mark, and I couldn't believe our luck. Our little miracle had finally come to us, and when our baby boy, Jacob, was born, it felt like a dream come true. But it wasn't just the joy of him being born that felt miraculous. There was something unusual about him, something that drew spirits to him. It all started when Jacob was only a few weeks old. Whenever he began to cry, an odd light would appear above his crib. It wasn't from any lamp or reflection we could identify. We never figured out where it came from. But every time that light appeared, Jacob would calm down instantly. He would smile and coo, as though someone or something unseen was comforting him. We never thought much of it at the time, and honestly, we were just happy it kept him calm. As the months passed, strange little things began to happen. Items in his nursery would shift positions as if moved by invisible hands, and I would sometimes catch Jacob smiling and laughing at nothing at all. It was unnerving, but never frightening. At least, not at first. That all changed one afternoon when my mother-in-law, Carol, came by to visit. She had picked up a few toys from a garage sale, including an old, worn stuffed bear. The moment I laid eyes on it, a chill ran down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. I put the bear in Jacob's crib anyway, trying to shake the feeling. That night, Jacob woke up screaming. At first, I thought it was just teething pain, but no matter what I did, he couldn't settle. His cries went on for hours, until finally, exhaustion took over and he fell into a fitful sleep. But the next night, it happened again. And this time, as soon as we laid him in his crib, he stood up, wailing and reaching out to be picked up. 3 hours later, he finally fell asleep, only to wake up again in the middle of the night, pointing straight at the bear. That's when I knew. The bear had to go. I threw it in the trash and took it outside, praying that whatever had been causing Jacob's distress would leave with it. After that, the nightly terror stopped. Jacob returned to his usual happy self, and we all breathed a sigh of relief. It felt as though whatever spirit had been attached to that bear had moved on. By the time Jacob was 18 months old, Mark and I decided to try for another baby. We didn't want to push our luck, but we hoped for another miracle. At first, nothing happened. But then, in the middle of one particularly restless night, things started to happen again. Jacob's battery-operated toys would turn on by themselves, playing music or counting aloud. It wasn't just once. This happened every night for about 2 weeks. It wasn't terrifying, but it sure was strange, and it got old very quickly. Then, just as mysteriously as it had begun, it stopped. A week or two later, I found out I was pregnant again. I couldn't help but wonder if the new baby had been testing the waters before arriving. When I asked Jacob if he had met the new baby, he just smiled and nodded knowingly, as though he was holding onto some kind of secret. Now, as I wait for my spring due date, things have settled. The toys are silent, but Jacob has a new friend. He calls him Babu. Jacob talks to Babu in a language I can't understand, words that only he seems to know. I'm not sure if Babu is just an imaginary friend or something more, but given everything that's happened so far, I can't shake the feeling that Babu might not be as imaginary as he seems. If history is anything to go by, there's a good chance that Babu is yet another spirit keeping Jacob company. I just hope they all stay friendly. Several years before he passed away in May 1999, unrelated to this story, my uncle worked as a bartender at a small local corner bar called the Cornerstone Pub in our hometown of Pine Lake, Michigan. The pub, which had been around for more than a century, had seen its fair share of local history. It stood just across from the now-defunct train station, a place long abandoned but still remembered by the town's older residents. My uncle was a perfect fit for the job. He was everyone's buddy, charismatic, dependable, and a bit of a wild card. Thanks to his outgoing nature, he often worked late, closing the pub on most nights. He used to tell me that he was never truly alone in that place, and strange, unexplainable things seemed to happen on a regular basis. One of the creepiest stories he shared happened during a regular shift when the bar was still busy, with several patrons milling about. An old, tarnished mirror, one that hung prominently behind the bar, spanning most of the wall, suddenly flew off its hooks. It didn't just fall. It shot out from the wall, soaring about 5 feet, before crashing onto the bar counter and shattering into countless pieces. The unsettling part. At that exact moment, my uncle had been recounting some of his own eerie experiences to a customer, detailing the strange occurrences that often took place when the bar closed. It was as though the entity that haunted the place wanted him to stop talking, to deliver a very clear, supernatural message. Enough. Another strange event happened on a particularly quiet evening. The bar was unusually still, and my uncle knew exactly which stools had been taken and which hadn't. There was one stool, in particular, usually claimed by a regular who hadn't been in all day, and yet, when my uncle was wrapping up the night, he noticed that the cushion on that seat had been torn to shreds. And when I say shredded, I mean it looked like someone had violently slashed the fabric with a knife. The odd thing, no one had been anywhere near that stool all day, and in a bar as small and quiet as the Cornerstone, there's no way such a destructive act could have gone unnoticed. But perhaps the most unnerving story involved the cellar. After locking up one evening, my uncle went downstairs to restock the beer and liquor coolers before calling it a night. As he was down there, a chilling sensation crept over him, an unmistakable presence, though he couldn't see anyone. And then, out of nowhere, he felt something pursuing him up the stairs. Now my uncle was a big guy minus 6'2", and about 350 pounds. He wasn't the kind of man who would be easily frightened. In fact, he had always been open-minded, particularly fascinated by Native American folklore and the paranormal. But whatever he felt that night wasn't something typical. It had a menacing, almost hostile energy. He didn't hesitate. He bolted up those stairs, slamming the cellar door behind him, shaken to his core and unwilling to turn back. My uncle's stories paint a picture of a pub rich in history, one where the spirits of the past clearly linger, not ready to be forgotten. Whether these spirits were protective or something far darker, I can't say for sure. My uncle wasn't one to exaggerate or tell tall tales, and with his calm demeanor and level-headed nature, I believe him when he says that the fear he felt was real. You can draw your own conclusions about the Cornerstone Pub and its haunted happenings, but there's one thing I know for sure. After hearing my uncle's stories, I'm glad I never had to close that bar myself. I served in the United States Navy and was posted to the USS Arizona for 4 years, from 1990 to 1994. As a communications specialist, one of my primary duties involved frequent trips to the ship's mast, which was the highest point aboard. To reach the mast, there were 3 routes: the port or starboard ladders, which were steep like household stairs, or the aft ladder, a longer, shipborne ladder with a 45-degree angle. The aft ladder was about 12 feet long. It had a slight flex when 2 people were on it together, but it was sturdy when climbed alone. Still with its length and incline, it was the safest choice in rough seas. One night during my shift at sea, around 4 a.m., my supervisor ordered me to the mast to prepare ceremonial items for our arrival in Charleston. The sea state was rough, and the ship was rolling heavily to port. Concerned for my safety, my supervisor insisted I use the aft ladder to minimize the risk of falling overboard. As I climbed the ladder, I immediately felt something unusual. The ladder began to flex, not the subtle movement I'd expect from being alone on it, but the distinct sensation of someone rapidly ascending behind me. The feeling was unmistakable. and I felt an icy chill, as though someone was right there, following my every step. When I reached the mast, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. It wasn't malicious or playful, but more like someone standing over my shoulder, ensuring I was doing my job properly. Trying to shake off the feeling, I entered the communications shelter, a small compartment where we kept ceremonial items. Inside, the sense of another presence grew stronger. It felt like someone was standing right beside me, and I could even hear heavy, labored breathing, like someone who had been running or struggling to catch their breath. I quickly finished my tasks and descended back to the lower decks, shaken but determined to report it to my supervisor. When I told him what had happened, he dismissed my story but suggested I talk to Chief Petty Officer Michaels, a veteran who had served on the ship for nearly 20 years and might know more about its history. When I shared my experience with Chief Michaels, he nodded thoughtfully. He told me about a young sailor, a communications specialist, who had been killed while racing up the aft ladder to his action station during a battle in the Pacific. During an attack, the ship was struck by a torpedo, and a piece of shrapnel severed the sailor's head clean off. Hearing this made my blood run cold. Suddenly, the strange sensations I'd felt made sense. Perhaps the spirit of that brave sailor was still aboard, forever trapped in the final moments of his life, dutifully climbing the ladder to fulfill his role. I never encountered that presence again during my time on the U.S. Arizona, but I wasn't the only one who had experienced it. Over the years, other sailors shared similar stories of an unseen force on the mast. Months later, when the U.S. Arizona was decommissioned, and I had the chance to return for a brief stint while awaiting my new ship's return from a mission in the Middle East, I decided to test the waters. As a supervisor this time, I sent a junior sailor up to the mast early one morning during my watch. When he returned, he was pale and visibly shaken. "There's something not right up there," he said, refusing to go into further detail. "I'm not going back up until daylight." This happened a couple of years ago, and although I've never really been one to believe in ghosts, what I experienced that night made me question everything. It was a Friday evening, and I was staying over at my best friend Emily's house in our small town of Pine Lake. We had the whole night to ourselves, so we decided to rent a horror movie. After debating for a bit, we picked The Conjuring because our other friends had said it was terrifying. After grabbing the movie from the local rental shop, we changed into our pajamas, stocked up on snacks, and made our way into the TV room. Emily's family had this old, oversized TV in the corner of the room, and with the dim lighting and her surround sound system cranked up, it created the perfect eerie atmosphere. The movie had us on edge, and by the time the credits rolled, we were both spooked, especially after the jump scares. Feeling unsettled, we decided to head to Emily's bedroom, which was at the front of the house, near the creaky front door. Both of us were still shaken from the movie, and when we got to her room, Emily insisted that I check the closet and look under the bed to make sure no one was hiding. I reluctantly agreed, but when I looked, everything seemed normal. We locked the bedroom door, climbed into our beds, Emily in her own, and me on a mattress on the floor. We lay there talking quietly, trying to shake off the fear when we heard it. A sharp tapping on her window. Emily went pale and begged me to climb into her bed with her. I didn't want to, but I gave in, and we huddled together while the tapping continued for what felt like an eternity before it suddenly stopped. After a long, tense silence, I went back to my mattress, and we both eventually drifted off. I woke up abruptly at exactly 1:00 a.m. to the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway toward Emily's room. The heavy footsteps halted right outside the door, and I watched the doorknob slowly turn, as though someone was trying to get in. When it didn't open, the doorknob began to rattle violently, and whoever, or whatever, was outside began banging on the door with force. I lay frozen in fear, not daring to move, praying that it would stop. Eventually, the banging subsided, and I somehow managed to fall back asleep. At 2:00 a.m., I woke up again to the same eerie sounds. The footsteps, the doorknob turning, the violent rattling and banging. Everything played out the same way, as if we were stuck in some kind of loop. This time, I stayed perfectly still, hoping that it would just go away. Once the noise finally stopped, I tried to relax, but I was still on edge. At 3:00 a.m., the same thing happened again. By now, I wasn't as terrified, mostly because I realized that whatever was out there couldn't get into the room, but I was still uneasy. I whispered to Emily, asking if she'd heard it too, and she nodded, her voice trembling. "Someone's going to hurt us," she whispered over and over. She told me that she had also woken up on the hour, just like I had, and had heard the same terrifying sounds. When it happened again at 4:00 a.m., I had enough. I decided I was going to get up and see what was outside the door. I started to pull back my covers, but Emily grabbed my arm, begging me not to open it. Seeing the fear in her eyes, I hesitated, then gave in and stayed in bed. After that, the noises stopped completely, and we spent the rest of the night in tense silence. When morning came, we asked Emily's family if anyone had been awake during the night. Her younger brother said he hadn't heard a thing, and her parents, who slept on the other side of the house, claimed they hadn't gotten up and had no reason to be near her room. To this day, I still can't explain what happened that night. I've stayed at Emily's house since then, but nothing like that has ever occurred again. But I can't seem to shake the memory of it. What, or who, was trying to get into our room that night? It was terrifying, just terrifying. My dad, my younger sister, and I had just come back from a long, exhausting drive across the state, returning from a trip to St. Louis. The drive had been grueling. The roads were crowded, the rest stops were packed, and by the time we finally pulled into our driveway, I was completely wiped out and had no energy left to deal with anything. But something, or someone, had other plans. After we got home, I unpacked and went straight to bed, trying to escape the fatigue that had settled deep in my bones. But sleep didn't come easily. I was restless, my mind still reeling from the events of the trip. Then, just as I started to drift off, I woke up suddenly, feeling an overwhelming sense of unease. It was as if I was being watched by someone or something. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my tired mind playing tricks. I turned my focus to the events of the day, anything to distract me, but my eyes couldn't help but wander to the old mirror across from my bed. It was framed in tarnished gold, hanging crookedly on the wall, its surface always reflecting more than it should. The mirror wasn't anything special, but at night it always seemed to twist the light in a way that made it feel unsettling. Tonight was no different. The mirror wasn't bent, but something felt off. As I stared at the reflection, I saw him. An old man, standing by the side of my bed, his face pale like a ghost. He wore a dark, almost ragged suit, and his arm was extended, hovering just above my head. My heart stopped. I wanted to scream, but my voice was frozen, stuck in my throat. I turned to look where the figure should have been standing, but when I looked, there was nothing there. I turned back to the mirror, and there he was again, right beside my bed, watching me. My breath caught in my chest, and my body trembled as I whipped my head back to the spot. Once again, nothing. My mind raced, trying to reason with itself, convincing me it was just a hallucination. But when I glanced into the mirror a third time, the figure moved. That's when I knew it wasn't a dream. This was real. I finally found my voice and screamed, "Dad," as loud as I could. I heard him scramble off the couch upstairs, his footsteps thudding down the stairs as he rushed into my room. I flicked on the light, my heart pounding in my chest. When I turned to the mirror again, the reflection staring back at me was not the old man, but my dad, standing in the doorway, wide-eyed. Breathing in short gasps, I explained everything. My dad, ever the skeptic, shook his head, trying to calm me down. "You're just exhausted from the trip," he said. "It's probably just your imagination." He couldn't have been more wrong. The next night, I decided to stay at a friend's house, just to get away from the room. But my dad insisted on staying in the same room. He didn't believe me, not until it happened to him. The next morning, he looked like a ghost. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with disbelief as he recounted what had happened. He had seen it too, the same figure, standing by the bed, staring down at him. Whatever it wasn't just in my head. It had revealed itself to him too, and now, neither of us could ever forget it. I'm a college student, and my best friend Emily and I often take weekend trips to her family's cabin in the quiet hills of Pine Hollow. It's the perfect escape, isolated with no phone service, no TV, just the sound of the wind in the trees. We usually spend our days unwinding, catching up on rest, and enjoying the simplicity of the woods. 2 summers ago, we went up there for a much-needed break from the stress of summer school. Emily's dog, a big black lab named Max, joined us for the weekend, and we spent the first day hiking through the forest and tidying up the cabin. It was a calm, peaceful day. By 11:30 p.m., we decided to get some sleep. The cabin's second floor is accessed by a steep staircase that feels almost like climbing a ladder. The upstairs has just 2 rooms, and we always sleep there. The 2 double beds are far enough apart for us to have our own space while still being able to see each other if needed. Max, unable to manage the stairs, had been resting at the bottom of them, his soft whines fading as he finally settled in for the night. Once we settled into our beds, I fell asleep almost immediately, but somewhere in the night, I woke up with the distinct feeling that there was an animal at the foot of my bed. It was so vivid that I reached down and petted it. Its fur was sleek and soft, and I assumed it was Max. I didn't think much of it at the time, just drifted back into sleep. The next morning, as we came downstairs, Max was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, tail wagging. Emily looked at me, puzzled, and insisted there was no way Max could have gotten upstairs without us hearing him. I had to agree. My mind raced as I realized, what had I touched in the night? We tried to push it out of our minds and spent the day as we normally would, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. That night, we went to bed at our usual time. But shortly after settling in, I noticed something odd, a strange light flashing intermittently in the room. It wasn't constant, just quick, bright flashes like fireflies, but much brighter. After the 3rd or 4th flash, Emily asked, "Did you see that?" I nodded, feeling a chill crawl down my spine. The flashes seemed to be coming from a small grate in the floor, right between our beds. Emily, trying to stay calm, suggested I turn on the bedside lamp that was conveniently right next to it. I hesitated, dread creeping up my spine, but after what felt like an eternity, I reached over and flicked on the light. Everything appeared normal, yet the sense of fear only intensified. Without saying another word, we both bolted from our beds, scrambling down the steep staircase and running out of the cabin. We huddled together in Emily's car, shivering despite the warm summer air. We had a problem. The keys were still inside the house. We were stranded, helpless. Emily pulled out her phone, and after a moment of silent panic, we decided to call the police. Pine Hollow, with its population of less than 200, was too small to have a full-time officer, so help came from the neighboring town. When the officer arrived, he helped us search the cabin thoroughly, but there was nothing, no animals, no faulty wiring, no signs that anyone had been there. The house was empty and quiet, just as we'd left it. Still shaken, we packed up our things as quickly as we could, with the officer standing outside, and made the long drive back to our apartment. The 3-hour trip felt like an eternity, the adrenaline keeping us awake, yet the silence between us spoke volumes. We've gone back to the cabin since then, but nothing strange has happened again. Emily even moved there to live full-time. The only thing that remains is the unsettling mystery of that weekend. The area has a deep history of Native American settlements, and Emily's grandfather built the cabin in the early 1930s, so we know no one has passed away there. But that night, those flashes, the strange feeling of the animal at my side, will always be with me. It was the scariest night of my life. I still don't know what happened, and I hope I never find out. My husband and I were ready for a fresh start. After years of living in the chaos of Miami, we decided to move to a small, quiet town in Central Florida. We longed for peace and simplicity, far away from the noise of the city. My husband, a talented craftsman, suggested we buy an old house and renovate it ourselves. The house we found was a 1927 farmhouse, originally built by the grandson of a Civil War soldier. My husband discovered it during a trip in November 1994, but I couldn't get time off from work to join him. Excited, he called me and told me he was putting in an offer. Although I hadn't seen it yet, I trusted his judgment and knew it could be a great project. When I finally arrived to see the house, I couldn't help but feel a wave of disappointment. It was in worse shape than I had imagined. Broken windows, peeling paint, and an overgrown yard. But the deal was already done. The bid had been accepted. My husband reassured me that we could fix it up, one room at a time. During my first visit, I struck up a conversation with one of the owner's teenage sons. I asked if he had grown up in the house and if he could share any history with me. He told me that his family had lived there for about 5 years, but had to sell because his father had recently taken his own life. The financial burden had been too much. My heart sank, and I hesitantly asked, "Did it happen here, in the house?" He nodded. "Yes. In March, we moved in. My husband was waiting for a job transfer, so I spent most of my time alone in the house with my 2 young grandchildren. Every weekend, my husband would come up to work on renovations, but the rest of the time, it was just us in that old house, isolated. The property was on an acre of land, bordered by orange groves on 2 sides and a dense forest across the road. Our only neighbor lived far at the end of the property. Most days, I felt completely alone. One night, our daughter came to visit and stayed on the front porch, which we had turned into a makeshift bedroom. It wasn't much, just a twin bed surrounded by boxes. She didn't mind, or so I thought. That first night, she rushed into the living room, trembling. She told me that when the train passed by and blew its whistle, she heard 2 children's voices whispering, "Look, Grandma! Look, Grandpa! There's the train." She asked if I had heard it too. I assured her it was just her imagination, urging her to go back to bed. But she refused and stayed with me on the sofa bed for the rest of her stay. 2 weeks later, I was alone again. One night, around 3 a.m., I was lying awake on the sofa bed when I heard the unmistakable sound of children playing on the front lawn. I got up to check, but there was no one there. After that night, I never heard the children again. Guests to the house often felt uneasy too. Some believed the guest room was where the man had taken his life, but it wasn't. It had actually happened in what would soon become my bedroom. Several visitors told me they couldn't sleep, the overwhelming sense of dread keeping them awake all night. Some even refused to visit again, claiming the house gave off a feeling of pure evil. One day, my granddaughter and her cousin were playing outside when we called them in to shower before dinner. They went into separate bedrooms, but within moments, both of them came running out, pale and shaken. They said they'd heard voices outside their bedroom windows saying, "Yeah, let's scare them to death." There were no other children on the property, and I couldn't explain what they had heard. On another occasion, my 25-year-old son came for a visit. As we were chatting in the living room, he suddenly froze, staring at me. "The baby just walked across the floor and onto the front porch," he said, looking confused. I insisted that wasn't possible. She was fast asleep in her crib. We went to check, and sure enough, she was still there, sound asleep. Whatever he saw, it wasn't her. One cold morning, while I was napping with the baby, I heard the back door creak open and heavy footsteps echo across the wooden floors. They stopped just outside the hallway, and I got up to investigate. There was no one there. Every room was empty, and the property was silent. When I mentioned this to my daughter, she revealed that she'd experienced the same thing while babysitting. Loud, unmistakable footsteps coming from inside the house. We stayed in that house for another 3 years. Although I often felt the presence of something, I was never truly scared. Every night at the same time, I'd hear footsteps coming up the old wooden stairs leading to the front door. The previous owner I spoke with admitted she'd heard them too, though she never experienced the sounds of children like we did. We sold the house a year ago. I can't say I miss the unsettling moments, but there's something about that old house that lingers in my mind. We never disclosed the strange occurrences to the new owners, as there was no tangible proof. Still, I can't help but wonder if they'd noticed anything unusual. I hope they're at peace now, just as we are in our new home. I attended an old school in a small town in Kentucky, housed in a building that had been standing for over 80 years. One of the most noticeable features of the old structure was a tall tower that jutted out from its side, resembling the bell tower of an old church. During my time there, the tower was strictly off-limits to students. None of us knew why, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with it. Occasionally, the windows would be found open, though the school janitors insisted that only the church in town had the keys to access it. For years, we simply accepted the tower's forbidding presence, thinking little of it. It wasn't until about 5 years after we moved to a new building that the chilling truth finally came to light. Many years ago, back in the 1950s, the school's traditional bell had been hung in that very tower. Every morning, the head prefect was tasked with climbing the tower to ring the bell, signaling the beginning of the school day. One morning, the bell rang as usual, but then it didn't stop. It kept ringing and ringing, louder and more frantic by the second. After 2 minutes of the relentless ringing, the principal, confused and concerned, decided to investigate. He took one of the janitors with him, both of them thinking the worst. But when they arrived at the tower, they found the door locked. This was strange, as only the head prefect and the principal had the keys to that door. They broke the door open, and what they found inside horrified them. The head prefect was hanging by the thick bell rope, which had become wrapped tightly around his neck. His eyes were bulging and his mouth was wide open in a silent scream for help. The bell continued to swing and ring, powered by his lifeless body. The scene was grotesque and baffling. After the tragic incident, the historic bell, which had tolled for over 100 years, was removed from the tower and relocated to the school's foyer, where it could be rung safely. The tower was sealed off and deemed too dangerous for anyone to enter. But the true mystery remains. How did the rope get so tightly wound around the head prefect's neck? Why was there no sound of him struggling or calling for help? And how did the door lock itself when only he and the principal had the key? Over the years, rumors began circulating about the head prefect's restless spirit. Some of the older students claimed to have seen his ghost peering out from the tower's windows, his face pale and sorrowful. Whether these sightings were real or simply the result of overactive imaginations, no one could say for sure. But one thing was certain: the tower still casts an eerie shadow over the school. The old school building itself always seemed to carry an air of mystery. Strange events were reported over the years. When the new school building was being constructed nearby, a worker tragically fell to his death. Some people believe that the area, with its long history, holds energies that aren't easily understood, energies that seem to linger in the air. If you ever find yourself in the small town of Pine Ridge, Kentucky, make sure to visit the old building on Hillcrest Avenue. You'll feel it instantly, the strange, unsettling atmosphere that surrounds it. Just remember, some stories are better left whispered in the dark. And if you're the superstitious type, you might want to carry a branch of oak for protection. I've always been more sensitive to strange happenings than most, but I used to brush it off as an overactive imagination, just a talent for seeing things others might miss. I should be the biggest skeptic. I've got a solid background in science, but like many people who enjoy delving into the unknown, I try to keep an open mind. For me, validating an experience depends on the setting, the people around me, and how I'm feeling at the time. This particular experience, however, stands out as one of my more unsettling ones, even if it might sound like a typical ghost story shared casually over dinner. Its subtlety is what makes it so unnerving. It all began after my brother's 21st birthday celebration in a small town in Oregon. I'd taken the train back home and got off at a station near the outskirts, right next to one of the largest cemeteries in the area. Cemeteries have never bothered me. I've never believed they're places of evil. The night was calm and crisp, and I figured I'd stop by the local pub to catch up with some friends before it closed. As I walked past the cemetery, everything seemed perfectly normal. The old town bowling alley bordered one side of the path, its tall hedges casting shadows in the dim light. I was enjoying the quiet, letting the chill of the evening settle around me when suddenly, a small figure emerged from the gap in the hedge and started walking ahead of me. At first, I didn't think much of it, except that I was surprised to see a child. He looked about 7, out walking alone so late on a Tuesday night. The boy had a worn leather satchel hanging over his shoulder, and he wore what looked like an old-fashioned school uniform. Shorts, a button-down shirt, and a distinct striped beanie that felt like something out of the 1940s. I thought it was odd. None of the local schools I knew had uniforms like that. Though confused, I felt an odd comfort in his presence, like he was there to keep me company, but there was a sadness about it. A sense that something wasn't right about a child being out alone at night. I didn't want to get too close, not wanting to startle him, so I slowed my pace. That's when I noticed something strange. Whenever I slowed down, the boy slowed too, maintaining the same distance between us. It wasn't obvious at first, just a coincidence, I thought. Then curiosity crept in. I decided to test it. I quickened my pace just a bit, and the boy matched my steps exactly. I slowed again, and he did the same. A chill ran up my spine, that unmistakable feeling when something's off. My stomach tightened. The boy was maintaining a precise distance from me, never letting me get closer than about 15 paces. I tried to stay calm as I walked down the empty street. Eventually, I reached the turn for the pub. The boy kept walking straight ahead, never once looking back or pausing. I glanced toward the street I was about to turn onto, then looked back at him. He was gone. The street was long and open. There was no way he could have disappeared so quickly. That's when the fear hit me. My heart started racing, and I felt a sudden surge of adrenaline. Without thinking, I ran the rest of the way to the pub. Even though the boy had never seemed threatening, something about the whole experience rattled me to my core. When I got to the pub, a friend noticed me stumbling through the door. Her surprised expression said it all. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Little did she know. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. The boy didn't seem harmful, but there was something profoundly unsettling about his presence. That memory has stayed with me, and every time I think back to that quiet, empty street, I can't shake the feeling that what I saw wasn't of this world. There's another story I have from the same area, one that's even scarier, but I'll save that for another time. This happened about a year ago, and though I don't usually believe in ghosts, I can't quite shake the feeling that there's something out there after this experience. It was a Friday night, and I was staying over at my friend Emily's house, not her real name. We decided to rent a horror movie, and after a bit of debate, we went with Scream. Our friends had told us it was one of the scariest films they'd ever seen. When we got back from the video store, we slipped into our pajamas, grabbed a few bags of chips, and made ourselves comfortable in the living room. Emily's house had an old-school, big-screen TV with a surround sound system, and with the lights turned off, it was the perfect setting for a spooky night. The movie was tense, and by the time it ended, both of us were on edge. A little shaken, we made our way to Emily's bedroom at the front of the house. We still felt the lingering fear from the movie, so when we got to her room, Emily insisted I check the closet and peek under the bed to make sure there was no one hiding. I did, and everything seemed fine. We locked the bedroom door and climbed into our respective spots, Emily in her bed and me on a mattress on the floor. We lay there talking in whispers, trying to push aside the fear, when we heard it. A soft tapping on the window. Emily freaked out completely and begged me to climb into her bed with her. Hesitant, I agreed, and we huddled together while the tapping continued for what felt like 5 minutes before it suddenly stopped. Eventually, I returned to my mattress, and we both tried to fall asleep. I woke up suddenly at exactly 1:00 a.m. to the sound of heavy footsteps coming down the hallway toward Emily's bedroom. The steps stopped just outside the door, and I watched as the doorknob turned slowly, as if someone was trying to open it. When the door didn't budge, the doorknob rattled violently, followed by hard banging on the door. I lay completely still, frozen in fear, praying for it to stop. The noise eventually died down, and somehow I managed to fall back asleep. At 2:00 a.m., I woke again to the same sounds: the footsteps, the turning doorknob, the violent rattling and banging. It was all happening again. This time, I stayed still, too scared to move, hoping it would stop. When it finally did, I fell asleep, but the unease never left. By 3:00 a.m., it happened again. I wasn't as terrified this time. I think I had resigned myself to the fact that whatever it was couldn't get in. Still, the unsettling feeling remained. I whispered to Emily to see if she was awake, and she was. When I asked if she had heard it too, she nodded, trembling. "Someone's going to kill me," she kept repeating, almost like a chant. She told me she had been waking up on the hour, just like I had, and had heard the exact same noises. At 4:00 a.m., it started again. I'd had enough. I decided I was going to open the door and see what was on the other side. I started to pull back the covers, but Emily begged me not to. Seeing how terrified she was, I decided against it and stayed in bed. After that, the noises finally stopped for the rest of the night. When morning finally came, we decided to ask Emily's family if anyone had been up during the night. Her little brother said he hadn't heard anything. Her parents, who slept on the opposite side of the house, said they hadn't been awake and had no reason to go anywhere near Emily's room. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened that night. I've stayed at Emily's house since then, and nothing like that has ever happened again. But even now, when I close my eyes at night, I can't help but wonder what or who was trying to get into our room. "5 years ago, something happened that completely shifted my understanding of the boundary between this world and the next. I've always believed in the supernatural, but until then, I hadn't experienced anything myself. My mother, however, has an undeniable connection to the spirit world. She has the rare ability to see and sense things that most people can't. I always thought I hadn't inherited that gift, until one night when I was proved wrong. While I was away at college, one of my dogs became incredibly sick. He wasn't just a pet to me. He was family. We grew up together, and every night he would curl up on my bed, keeping me company. Despite all my parents' efforts to help him, they eventually realized he was suffering too much. They made the painful decision to have him put to sleep. I didn't get to say goodbye, and that loss weighed heavily on me for weeks. After graduation, I went back to visit my parents. The first night back, the silence in the house felt overwhelming. I didn't realize how much noise my dog made until he was gone. The house seemed so empty without him. My parents' 2 other dogs were happy to see me, but I could tell they missed their friend too. That night I went to bed with one dog lying on the floor beside me and the other curled up next to me on the bed. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up, not sure why. Disoriented, I blinked into the soft glow of the hallway light, which was coming from the bathroom nightlight. And then I saw him, my dog, the one who had passed. He was sitting in the hallway, staring at me. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was still dreaming, but when I looked again, he was still there. His familiar shape, those kind eyes, there was no mistaking it. I quickly glanced down at the bed, where the other dog was peacefully asleep beside me, and then down to the floor where the second dog lay undisturbed. Neither of them had moved. I looked back at the hallway, and my beloved dog was still there, watching me. He didn't move, didn't wag his tail, and didn't make a sound, but I could feel his joy at seeing me home again. My heart filled with love and sadness at the same time. I whispered softly, "I love you. Goodbye, my old friend. It's okay to leave now." A sense of calm washed over me as I lay back down. A few moments later, I glanced back at the hallway. This time, he was gone. I truly believe that every living being needs closure, and I feel incredibly lucky that my dog came back to say goodbye, showing me that he was at peace. underscore 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 underscore. My mother's experiences with the supernatural have always intrigued me. She was born with a veil over her face, a rare condition that has been linked to heightened spiritual sensitivity. She didn't fully understand the significance of it growing up, but she often knew things before they happened, like who was calling before the phone rang or what time it was without ever looking at the clock. It wasn't until later in life that she learned that those born with this condition often have an extra sense for the spiritual world. One of her most significant encounters happened with her father. When he had a heart attack and was taken to the hospital, my mom immediately felt that he wouldn't make it. Despite the fact that our family had grown distant from him, I believe he reached out to her in those final moments to make amends and say goodbye. One night, shortly after he was admitted, my brother and I had gone to bed early. My mom went to bed around 10 p.m., leaving my dad downstairs watching TV. She closed the bedroom door to block the light and noise from the living room. About 20 minutes later, the door opened, the light spilled in, and the sound of the TV grew louder. But then the door shut quietly again. She then heard footsteps approaching her side of the bed. The room grew noticeably colder, and as she pulled the covers closer, she felt a weight settle on the bed next to her. Thinking it was my dad, she opened her eyes. But it wasn't him. There, sitting beside her, was her father. He was transparent, and she could see the wall behind him through his figure. He didn't say anything but reached out and gently touched her cheek. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he faded away and was gone. A moment later, the phone rang. It was my aunt, calling to say that my grandfather had passed away. I believe he came to apologize and find peace before he left this world. My mom still treasures that experience to this day. I've had strange experiences for as long as I can remember, since I was about 13. It's not just me either. My friends have had similar encounters, though I'm still unsure if these events are all connected or if they're just isolated incidents. Here's everything I've gone through. The first strange occurrence happened in the house I still live in, built in 1991. I was about 13, and my younger sister, Sarah, was 11. We were hanging out in my bedroom. She was on the bed, listening to music on my CD player and recording some songs, while I was standing by the mirror near the door, getting ready to meet my friend Emma. The music was loud, and I was singing along, completely distracted. Suddenly, I felt something grab my hip, hard. I spun around, expecting to see Sarah pulling a prank, but she was still sitting on the bed, a few feet away. I shouted, "Emma," thinking she might have sneaked into the room, but the doorway was empty. Nobody was there. Sarah's face went pale. She didn't know what had just happened either. All I can describe is the sensation. Warm, firm, and unmistakably real. It freaked both of us out. Another time, Emma came over after school on a Friday night. We were getting ready to meet up with friends, and I was lying on my bed, already dressed, while Emma sat on the sofa, putting on her makeup. She was facing the mirror, and while she was fixing her eyeliner, she suddenly smiled, waved, and said, "Hi." Then she froze. She turned to look at the door and said, "I just saw your dad." I stared at her. "That's impossible," I said. "My parents aren't home, and Sarah's out with her friends." Emma's face went white. "Now that I think about it," she said slowly, "he didn't really look like your dad. He seemed older and paler, but he smiled at me." Chills ran down my spine. Later, I realized that Emma's description perfectly matched my grandfather, who passed away before I was born. I hadn't told her anything about him, and she'd never seen a picture. Then there's the lady. She started appearing about 2 years ago, always when I'm lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. She stands in the corner of my bedroom, just above the door. She's beautiful, though I can't see her face clearly. It's more of a feeling. She wears a bonnet tied under her chin, with a brooch beneath it. Her hair is light, and she looks young, but I can only see her neck and head, as if the rest of her body isn't there. She doesn't frighten me, though I can't look at her for too long. Sometimes, even without looking, I know she's there. I've seen her about 12 times now. Once, my friend Jill and her boyfriend Stephen stayed over. During the night, Stephen turned over in bed and saw her. He was so terrified he hid under the covers and refused to get up until morning. He told Jill what he saw, but she dismissed it as a dream. When Jill mentioned it to me later, I asked her for a description. It perfectly matched the woman I see. Stephen has never come back to my house since. Another time, my friend Carl was outside in the yard, smoking a cigarette. I stood at the door, talking to him while he kicked a football around. Suddenly, he froze and stared at the window in the spare room. "Hey, look," he said. "There's your dad." I told him that wasn't possible. My parents weren't home. But Carl insisted, "There's a man at your window." I was too scared to look, my body frozen with fear. Carl decided to test it and walked to the end of the yard. When he turned back to look, he said, "He's gone." We ran inside and turned on every light in the house. I forced myself to check the spare room, with Carl beside me. My heart pounded as I opened the door, half expecting to find something there. But the room was empty. Nothing on the windowsill, no clothes hung up to dry, nothing that could cast a shadow. I've hated that room ever since. I can't sleep unless the door is shut, and even then, it makes me uneasy. I don't know who these apparitions are or why they keep appearing to me. The experiences are unsettling, to say the least, but the lady, her presence feels different. She's not malicious, but I can't figure out what she wants. Sometimes I think about seeing a spiritualist, just to get answers. For now, though, I'm left wondering why these things keep happening, and what it all means. Three years ago, my wife Sarah and I bought our first home together, a charming rustic farmhouse tucked away on the edge of Pine Lake, a small town in the Midwest. Back then, we weren't married yet, but we tied the knot the following summer. Little did we know, our wedding night would set the stage for some strange, often playful, happenings in our new home. Is it a ghost? We're beginning to think so. It all started on our wedding night. It was late November, and after a long day of celebrations, we returned home around 1:30 in the morning. Sarah stepped out onto the back porch to get some fresh air, and that's when she heard it. A man's voice, whistling a tune, drifting from the yard just outside. She quickly rushed back inside, turned on the porch light, and looked around, but no one was there. That was just the beginning. Soon after, the light in our bedroom began turning off by itself. This would usually happen while we were sitting up in bed, talking or playing with our cat. I'd get up, check the switch, and turn it back on, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Thinking it was a problem with the wiring, I replaced the light fixture and inspected the wiring and the ceiling. It all seemed fine, practically new, but still, the light continued to flicker off on its own. Then, one evening, something happened that left me chilled. I was in the bedroom, picking out clothes after work when the light switched off again. Irritated, I began walking toward the switch to turn it back on. And before I even reached it, the light flipped back on by itself. That was a first. Then there was the morning my wife, home alone, was talking on the phone. I had already left for work. Out of nowhere, a loud voice boomed through the house, sounding like it came from the stereo. The voice was quick, and though Sarah couldn't make out the words, it was as if the volume had been cranked all the way up. Even the person on the other end of the call heard it. Sarah checked the TV, the stereo, and even my old police scanner. I'm a firefighter, so I sometimes keep it on as background noise, but everything was off or turned down to the lowest setting. The most unsettling event came late one night while I was working at my desk. I wasn't online, but I had a music CD playing in the background. Sarah was painting in the next room, and I was sorting through some file drawers when suddenly a booming voice erupted from my computer speakers, cutting through the music like a knife. "The bell tolls 17, it said. The voice was so loud and jarring that I nearly fell out of my chair. Sarah rushed in, saying it sounded like the same voice she'd heard on the phone earlier. But the computer hadn't even been on when that happened. I replayed the song, thinking maybe it was part of the track, but there was nothing like that in the music. Then there are the smaller but equally puzzling events. The most recent occurred just a few nights ago. Sarah had washed the coffee pot in the dishwasher, but the cover wasn't in there with it. Later, she called me downstairs to help her search for it. It had completely vanished. We turned the house upside down, but never found it. Could she have misplaced it somewhere strange, or was our ghost playing another trick? These are just a few of the odd occurrences we've experienced. Nothing feels outright malicious, but it's hard not to wonder who, or what, is sharing our home. Whether it's a playful spirit or just a series of strange coincidences, one thing is for sure: life in our little farmhouse is never dull. When I was 11, my family moved into a brand new house in a quiet suburb. From the moment we stepped inside, I felt something was off. It's hard to explain, but there was an overwhelming sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Something about the house just felt wrong. My bedroom, in particular, was always cold. No matter how high we cranked the heat, there was always a chill in the air. I had my bed pushed right up against the radiator, but even when it was so hot it felt like it could burn me, I still lay there shivering. What was stranger, though, was stepping out into the hallway. As soon as I did, I was greeted by warm air that felt almost too hot compared to the freezing cold in my room. My parents noticed it too, but after bringing in specialists to check for drafts, cracks, or any other explanation, nothing came up. There was no logical reason for the chill, but it was there day and night. I learned to just live with it. Years passed, and when I left for college at 18, my younger sister moved into my old room. She mentioned the cold but didn't seem to mind it much. By then, I'd experienced other unsettling things in that house. Low, guttural growling that came from the direction of my parents' bedroom when I was home alone, and strange shapes I'd catch in the corner of my eye. I could never shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. One weekend, when I was home for a visit, my little cousin, who was 3 at the time, came to stay with us. My parents were going out for the evening, so I agreed to babysit her and my sister. They went to bed early, around 6 p.m., and I let them watch a video in my sister's room. Around 9 p.m., my sister came downstairs, looking pale and worried. "There's something wrong with her," she said, referring to our cousin. Thinking she might have hurt herself, I rushed upstairs. My cousin was sitting upright in bed, her eyes wide and filled with tears. She was shaking uncontrollably. I wrapped her in a blanket and brought her downstairs, but it took a long time before she stopped trembling. Even then, she wouldn't say what had scared her so badly. My sister explained that they had turned off the video around 8:30 p.m. and were lying in the dark, talking. She'd left the room to use the bathroom, and when she came back, she found my cousin in a state of panic. We called my uncle, and he came to pick her up. She didn't speak a word about what had happened. 2 weeks later, my mom mentioned that she'd spoken with my aunt, who had finally gotten my cousin to open up about that night. What she described still sends chills down my spine. According to my cousin, she had been feeling sleepy when, all of a sudden, she got extremely cold, like ice, she told my aunt. After my sister left, she saw a tall man dressed completely in black, wearing a tall hat, walk straight through the wall into the room. The man stood still for a moment, looking around, then vanished without a trace. A few moments later, another figure appeared, a man completely covered in gold. My cousin couldn't tell if he was wearing gold clothing or if he was glowing with a golden light, but she distinctly remembers him smiling at her. The most disturbing part: he had no face. Then the man in black returned, and this time the man in gold seemed to shrink back in fear. Both figures disappeared just before my sister came back into the room. After that, my cousin refused to ever step foot in our house again. To this day, she won't go near it, not even for a quick visit. And that bedroom, it still remains the coldest room in the house. No amount of heating, new windows, or insulation has ever made a difference. Whatever it is that lingers there, it hasn't gone away. To anyone who has ever lost a beloved pet, I hope this story brings you some comfort. It's a true story, and I'm so grateful to share it with you. This story began about 3 years ago when 2 of my 3 cats had kittens. They gave birth to 2 beautiful little ones, and I named them Jewel and Fidget. For 6 weeks, they stayed with their mother until they were weaned onto solid food. Since I couldn't keep them both, I gave Jewel to a close friend. But Fidget was different. She had a condition that caused her spine to grow crooked, which made her run in a strange, sideways way. Her back legs moved one direction, and her front legs moved another. This condition also kept her small, so she always stayed kitten-sized. Despite her challenges, Fidget was a sweet, loving little cat, and she quickly won my heart. I decided to keep her, adding her to my little family of cats: Lexi, Tasha, her parents, and Elmo, my alpha cat. Fidget fit in well, especially with Lexi. They would chase each other around the house and wrestle, always full of energy. Elmo, however, wasn't sure about her at first. He was territorial and wasn't ready to give up his place as the leader of the house. But over time, Fidget earned Elmo's respect, and eventually, they became close friends. I'd even catch them playing together now and then. A year passed, and I started noticing changes in Fidget. She stopped running and playing with Lexi and spent most of her time with Elmo. She'd snuggle up next to him constantly, never leaving his side. When she ate, Elmo would stand behind her, guarding her from the other cats. When she was cold, he'd wrap a paw around her and pull her close to keep her warm. I thought she might just be a little under the weather, but as the days went on, it became clear that something was very wrong. When I took Fidget to the vet, I received heartbreaking news. Her condition was now affecting her intestines. They were failing and bleeding. Her colon was dangerously enlarged. There was no chance for survival. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I couldn't let her suffer. I had to say goodbye to my sweet Fidget that day. Elmo took her loss just as hard as I did. For days he searched the house, looking for her in every corner and under every piece of furniture. When he finally gave up, he wasn't the same. He became quieter and more withdrawn. I missed Fidget terribly, and it hurt to see Elmo grieving too. Not long after, I noticed Elmo wasn't feeling well. He stopped eating and drinking, barely even moving. He wouldn't even touch his favorite treat, and that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I rushed him to the vet, and after a night of tests and waiting, the news confirmed my worst fears. Elmo had pancreatic cancer. Just like Fidget, there was nothing that could be done. Once again, I had to say goodbye to a dear friend. Losing 2 of my cats in such a short time was devastating. The house felt so empty without them. I found myself wondering if they were together, wherever they were now. One night, something incredible happened. I was sitting at my computer when I heard Lexi mewing from the kitchen. His cry sounded urgent, almost frantic, so I quickly stood up to check. As I walked into the kitchen, Lexi darted past me so fast that he nearly tripped me. "What's the matter, Lexi?" I asked, but he didn't stop. When I looked into the kitchen, I froze. Sitting under the table, side by side, were Elmo and Fidget. They were staring right at me. I couldn't move. I turned my head for just a moment to call my mom, but when I looked back, they were gone. A sense of peace washed over me. Tears ran down my face as I whispered, "I love you both and I miss you." In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since they passed. A deep sense of closure. Elmo had always taken care of Fidget in life, and now, even in death, Fidget had come back to guide him. I know they're together now, happy and at peace. That thought has brought me so much comfort and helped me come to terms with their loss. It was the summer of 1985, and my parents had just moved into a house they'd bought a few months earlier. I was married at the time, living just a short drive away, but I often visited them. The house was located in a quiet suburb near Pine Lake, an area rich in history and charm. My parents, along with my younger brother, who was 19 at the time, had settled into this peaceful two-story home. The house itself wasn't very old, but the neighborhood was steeped in history. The homes were nestled along the edge of Pine Lake, a serene body of water that had a mysterious reputation among locals. In fact, most people referred to it as Silver Lake, though its official name was Pine. The area was dotted with remnants of the past, crumbling stone foundations from long-forgotten settlers, and local legend said that none other than George Washington had once passed through the area. Each fall, the town held a Civil War reenactment by the lake, adding to the eerie atmosphere that seemed to cling to the place. It was a beautiful, quiet location, perfect for anyone seeking peace. But unbeknownst to us, this house would soon reveal that peace was only a surface illusion, hiding something much darker. The first sign that something wasn't right came when my cousin Michelle visited. She had flown in from Germany and was exhausted from her long trip. My mom had prepared the guest room for her on the second floor, an unused room that hadn't been slept in before. My parents slept on the first floor, and my brother's room was just across the hall from the guest room. The following morning, Mitchell seemed disturbed. She told us she'd seen someone standing in the corner of the room the night before. A woman with a hat, just standing there, watching her. My mom and I tried to brush it off as jet lag, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She insisted that she could sense a presence in the room, even when she couldn't see anything. We all chalked it up to her exhaustion, a simple case of an overactive imagination. After Michelle left, we forgot about the incident, at least for a while. Later that summer, my marriage fell apart, and I ended up moving back in with my parents. I brought my Cocker Spaniel, Gabriel, with me. My brother, being surprisingly generous, gave me his larger bedroom and moved into the smaller one across the hall, the same room Michelle had stayed in. What happened next still sends a chill down my spine. One night, a few days after I moved back in, I woke up to Gabriel growling. He was standing at the foot of my bed, stiff as a board, his eyes fixed on the door. His low growl grew louder, and his muscles were taut, ready to spring. I sat up, confused, when I heard my brother's voice from across the hall. "Joe," he called softly, like he wasn't sure if it was me. Then, more urgently, "Joe." Suddenly, his voice changed, sharp with panic. "Joe," he screamed, his voice cracking with terror. He kept calling my name, louder and more frantic, over and over. Gabriel barked furiously, straining against his collar as I held him back, too paralyzed by fear to move. My heart raced as my brother's screams echoed throughout the house. Then I heard the sound of feet pounding down the stairs. I stayed frozen in bed, time stretching on endlessly. I glanced at the clock. It was 3:15 a.m. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew something was terribly wrong. Finally, I gathered enough courage to leave my room. When I made my way downstairs, I found my brother sitting on the couch, head in his hands, looking shaken. My mom, equally pale, met me in the hallway. She whispered, "Something terrible happened to your brother tonight." We joined my dad and brother in the living room, and my brother began to explain what had happened. He'd fallen into a deep sleep after a long day of fishing, but in the middle of the night he woke up to find a girl standing at the foot of his bed. She had her back to him, dressed in a long white nightgown. Her dark hair was covered by what he thought was a white shower cap. At first, he thought it was me. "Joe," he called, but she didn't answer. He called again, more urgently, "Joe." This time, she slowly turned to face him. But it wasn't me. The girl just stood there, staring at him, silent and motionless. My brother's heart raced as he grabbed the pillow from his bed and threw it at her. But it passed right through her, landing softly on the desk next to his bed. She didn't flinch. She didn't move at all. She just kept staring. Terrified, my brother scrambled out of bed and reached out to touch her. The moment his hand made contact with her arm, she faded away like smoke in the wind. That's when he ran downstairs, screaming my name in sheer panic. After that night, my brother refused to stay in that room again. The fear that had settled into him was too much to bear. My parents, shaken and unsure of what had happened, decided to sell the house not long after. I still believe the girl was an apparition, one tied to the house's history and the eerie waters of Pine Lake. Her clothing, old-fashioned and out of place, seemed to link her to a time long past, perhaps even connected to the Civil War reenactments that took place by the lake each fall. Why she appeared in that room or why she chose my brother will never be fully understood, but I know what my brother saw that night was real, and it left a mark on all of us. I've been trying to remember the first time it all started, that strange, unsettling feeling that's haunted me for years. It's that feeling you get when you're alone, the hair on the back of your neck standing up, the sudden chill creeping over you. I'm 34 now, but I think it all began when I was around 5. It was a warm summer night, and I was outside playing in the driveway with a flashlight. I remember swinging the beam back and forth, just goofing around. Then suddenly, the light caught something in the darkness, 2 glowing eyes watching me from the shadows. My heart raced, and I froze. Panic hit me like a wave, and I ran inside, nearly wetting myself. My parents asked what was wrong, and I told them about the eyes. They quickly dismissed it, saying it was probably a deer. I clung to that explanation, desperate to believe it. It was comforting to think I had just imagined it. Glowing eyes, get a grip, I told myself. But even now, I wonder, what was it I really saw that night? By the time I was 10, my parents had divorced, and I felt more alone than ever. I rebelled, chasing the illusion of coolness, like so many others do. I started reading books that I shouldn't have, things like the Necronomicon, and hanging out in places I knew I probably shouldn't. I even dabbled in a few occult rituals, trying to find something to make sense of all the oddities in my life. One night stands out more than the others. I was with a friend, who was also my girlfriend at the time, and we were hanging out in this old cabin we'd found. It was tucked away on the edge of town, far from anyone. It had electricity, a few old pieces of furniture, and a general sense of mystery. We were drinking and listening to U2 on an old radio, talking and laughing like teenagers do. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, something banged on all 4 walls of the cabin, one after the other, fast, like something was running around the outside, slamming into the walls. We froze, our mouths hanging open, too stunned to speak. What the hell was that? We all muttered in unison. At first, I thought it was my little brother, playing a prank. Annoyed, I waited by the door, ready to catch him in the act. But the banging started again, louder this time. I threw open the door, expecting to catch him running away, but a cold, biting wind hit me full in the face. It felt like the dead of winter, even though it was the middle of a warm August night. The temperature dropped so fast, it made my skin crawl. I wasn't the only one who felt it. My friends' faces had turned as pale as ghosts. We decided to investigate. There's safety in numbers, right? We circled the cabin, looking for anything, but we found nothing. Just silence. Then, as we stood by the footbridge near the cabin, we heard it. Something heavy, running across the bridge, quick and deliberate. We tried to see what it was, but there was nothing there. Not a single sign of movement. None of us really talked about it after that night. We just didn't want to remember it. A few weeks later, something else happened. I was lying in bed, just starting to drift off to sleep, when I felt something heavy settle on my feet. At first, I thought it was the dog, but then I realized I hadn't felt the bed move. The weight started to spread, moving slowly up my legs, heavy and lifeless. When it reached my chest, I panicked. I tried to push it off, but my hands were pressed down hard against the bed. The weight was suffocating me. I could barely breathe. I struggled, but nothing helped. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a cold sweat. I was alone in my room. I told my mom about it, but she dismissed it as usual. Soon after, I was sent to live with my great-grandmother and father. Their house wasn't much better. The room I slept in was freezing, no matter how warm it was outside. At night, I'd hear strange noises from the attic, like ping-pong balls dropping and bouncing over and over again. I searched during the day but found nothing. Years later, a teenager who moved into that same house mentioned hearing the same noises. I guess I wasn't crazy after all. As I grew older, I tried to rationalize everything: stress, food, and overactive imagination. For a while, I thought those strange days were behind me. But then, 3 years ago, something happened I couldn't ignore. I was working alone in a house where someone had recently passed away. The family had moved out, and the place was empty. I was in the basement, sorting through old tools and books that had likely belonged to the deceased. As I turned around to pick something up, I felt it, a cold chill run up my spine. I turned to look, and that's when I saw it, a wisp of smoke curling through the air. But it wasn't normal smoke. It moved in unnatural ways, almost as if it were alive. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. I stood there, frozen, unable to move. When my helper came down, I told him what happened. He laughed, calling me crazy. I laughed too, but deep down, I knew what I had seen. What are the things that lurk in the dark? What makes a man question his sanity? I don't have all the answers, but I know this: whatever it is, it's real. And sometimes it never lets go, no matter how much you try to forget. I often try to recall the first time it all began, the strange sensation, that unshakable feeling that crawled under my skin. I was just a kid then, no older than 5. It was nighttime, and I remember being in the driveway, playing with my flashlight. I pointed it around, just goofing off. Then, out of nowhere, the beam hit something in the darkness. Glowing eyes. I froze. My heart raced. Panic flooded my chest, and I ran inside, barely able to breathe. My parents asked what was wrong, and I told them about the eyes. They quickly shrugged it off, saying it was probably a deer. I clung to their explanation, hoping it would make sense. But even today, I wonder, what exactly did I see? When I was 10, my parents divorced, and I felt more isolated than ever. I began rebelling, chasing that feeling of being cool. I explored the darker side of life, reading strange books and hanging around places I shouldn't have been. One night stands out. My ex-girlfriend, a friend, and I were hanging out at an old cabin in the woods near Pine Lake, one we often used. It had power, a few comforts, but it was isolated, perfect for us. We were drinking, smoking, and enjoying ourselves with music by U2 when it happened. Suddenly, a loud bang hit all 4 walls, one after the other. It was fast, like something was running around the cabin, hitting the walls. We froze, speechless, staring at each other in confusion. What the hell? We all whispered at once. I figured it was my little brother pulling a prank. I got up, angry, and waited by the door, ready to catch him. But as soon as I opened the door, a bitter wind slammed into me. It was a sharp, cold gust, like winter had come early. I couldn't believe it. It was supposed to be a warm night in August. My friends were equally shaken, their faces pale. We decided to check it out, thinking strength was in numbers. We circled the cabin, looking everywhere, but there was nothing. Then near the footbridge by a small stream, we heard it again. Something heavy, moving quickly across the bridge. We couldn't see it though, not a thing in sight. We didn't talk about it afterward, not once. None of us wanted to admit what had happened. Not long after, something else happened. I was lying in bed, drifting off to sleep when I felt something heavy settle at the foot of my bed. At first, I thought it was the dog, but when I looked, I realized I hadn't felt the bed move at all. The weight shifted, spreading up my body, cold and lifeless. It reached my chest, and I couldn't breathe. Panic set in as I pushed against it, but it pressed back, forcing the air from my lungs. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I was suffocating. I woke up in a cold sweat. I told my mom, but she just brushed it off as a nightmare. Soon after, I was sent to live with my great-grandmother and dad. Their house was no better. The bed in my room was freezing, no matter how warm the night was. At night, I'd hear what sounded like ping-pong balls bouncing in the attic above me. It would go on for hours. I checked every day for anything, rats, animals, but found nothing. Years later, another teen living there told me he heard the same noises. As I grew older, I tried to rationalize it all. I blamed stress, food, or overactive imagination. For a while, I thought it was all behind me. But 3 years ago, I experienced something I couldn't ignore. I was working on a house where someone had recently passed away. I was alone in the basement, going through some old tools and books that likely belonged to the deceased. I set the items down, then turned around. That's when I felt it. A cold shiver ran up my spine. I turned and saw it. A wisp of smoke curling in the air. But this wasn't just smoke. It moved strangely, almost as if it were alive. And then it disappeared. I stood there, rooted to the spot, until my helper came down. I told him what happened, but he just laughed and called me crazy. I laughed along with him, but deep inside, I knew exactly what I'd seen. What makes a person question their own sanity? What causes a rational mind to doubt itself? I don't have the answers, but I know one thing: whatever it was, it's real. And sometimes, no matter how hard you try to forget, it never really leaves you. This story was told to me by my uncle. It took place in the early 1950s in a small, rural town in the American South. A time when most people didn't have much in the way of streetlights, and traveling after dark meant either carrying a flashlight or braving the unknown. Around that time, strange stories began circulating through town. People talked about a ghostly figure seen near an old oak tree by the side of the road. One man even claimed that the figure had chased him all the way home. Over time, as these things often do, the story grew more terrifying, until people said the ghost looked like the devil himself. My uncle had heard the tale more than once, and being the nervous type, he made sure to leave his girlfriend's house before dark, not wanting to risk walking home alone in the night. But one evening, a storm rolled in, and the girl's father insisted that he stay until it passed. My uncle didn't want to stay, but he couldn't bring himself to admit that he was afraid to walk the roads in the dark. As luck would have it, the storm kept going, and by the time it stopped, it was nearly 9 p.m. My uncle, eager to get home, said goodbye to his girlfriend and set off down the road. To keep his shoes clean in the mud, he carried them slung over his shoulder. A little ways down the road, once he was sure no one could see him, he picked up a fallen branch and a few stones, just in case. Whistling to calm his nerves, he continued on his way. After walking for a couple of miles on the empty, pitch-black road, he suddenly heard a noise behind him. His heart raced as he quickened his pace into a slow jog. Then, without warning, he heard a scraping sound. Ahead, near an old oak tree on the path, he froze in his tracks. There, leaning against the tree, was a dark figure. Terrified, my uncle stopped and called out, "Who's there?" 3 times. It was said that if a ghost or spirit didn't answer, it was truly something otherworldly. The figure remained silent. My uncle thought about turning back and taking the long way home, but he knew his father would be furious if he showed up late. Summoning every ounce of courage, my uncle charged at the figure, swinging the branch and throwing the stones. He hit it repeatedly, knocking it to the ground and continuing to strike until he was sure it was defeated. Then, without looking back, he ran the entire way home. When he arrived, his father was waiting at the door, angry about his broken curfew. Out of breath, my uncle explained what had happened, describing the ghostly figure he had attacked and left behind. His father, unimpressed, scolded him. "You're such a coward, boy. It was probably just your imagination. How could you possibly beat a spirit? You'll be punished in the morning." The next morning, as his father was preparing to punish him, they were interrupted by the sound of a cart approaching the house. It was the father and brother of my uncle's girlfriend. The brother was bruised and battered, looking as if he had been in a fight. The father stormed up to my uncle and asked, "Did you see anything strange last night?" "My son was walking that road when someone attacked him with a stick and stones. I've warned him never to take that road where the devil is said to appear." It was then that my uncle realized, to his horror, that he had beaten his girlfriend's brother. He started to sweat, sure that he was about to get into even more trouble. But before he could respond, his own father spoke up. "No, my son didn't take that road." He went the long way home and is being punished for being late. Amused by the whole situation, his father let him off the hook completely. The ghost, as it turned out, was never seen again. Years later, my uncle ran into the man he had attacked that night, and they shared the full story. It turned out that the young man had been playing a prank, hiding in the bushes to scare people walking along the road. When he saw my uncle leave, he took his usual spot by the tree, hoping to give him a good fright. He hadn't expected to be attacked with a branch and stones. Knowing he'd be in even more trouble if his father found out he was the ghost, the man kept quiet and pretended he didn't see his attacker. Both men laughed about it later, but the story serves as a reminder. Playing pranks on people isn't always a good idea. It's been a while since I shared a story, so I figured I'd write about another experience from the house I grew up in. Most of the strange things I experienced were auditory or poltergeist-like, and they all happened during my teenage years. From what I've gathered, that seems pretty common for people who've lived in haunted houses. But this one story, it's still the scariest thing that ever happened to me. If you're into precognitive dreams or strange occurrences, you might want to check out my first story from August 1998 called Deja Vu. But for now, here's the one incident that still gives me chills. At the time, I had a friend who lived just a few houses up the street. His routine was to stop by in the mornings, let himself in, and pick me up so we could walk to school together. I'd always wake up first, have the house to myself, and unlock the front door for him so he could come in without disturbing me while I was getting ready. I had a habit of blasting the radio in my bedroom while I got ready for school. It was a way for me to wake up. My friend, on the other hand, had a habit of walking straight down the hall to my room and turning off the radio when he arrived. That was our unspoken signal. It let me know he was there, and we'd chat while I finished getting ready. Every morning went exactly like that. But this one was different. I was standing in the bathroom. The door cracked open just a bit, maybe 3 inches. I was brushing my hair, looking into the mirror, which reflected the bathroom door and the hallway beyond. From where I stood, I could see the doorway to my bedroom, just a few feet down the hall. Here's what happened. I had a tape playing on the radio that morning. As I was brushing my hair, the music suddenly cut off. Then I heard something else, faint but clear. The sound of denim swishing, like someone in jeans walking across the room, heading straight toward the door. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly thought, oh, it's just my friend, here like usual. But as the sound got closer to the door, I glanced up at the mirror, expecting to see him walk into view in the hallway. But nothing. No figure. The footsteps continued, echoing down the hall, past the bathroom door, and toward the living room at the end of the hall. I could hear them so clearly, the swish of denim, but there was no one there. I froze. My heart was pounding so loud I thought I might faint right there in the bathroom. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to get myself together. Finally, I gathered the courage to check things out. First, I checked the tape in the radio. I figured it had jammed or stopped by itself, but no, it was fine. It was as if someone, or something, had pressed the stop button. I walked into the living room, but it was empty. I checked every room in the house, but there was no one. And then I realized something. I hadn't even unlocked the front door yet. No one could have gotten in. Trying to make sense of it, I called my friend. He groggily picked up the phone and told me he was still in bed. Figures. Now we were going to be late. That's when it all hit me. There was no logical explanation for what had just happened. Whatever, or whoever, had turned off the radio and walked down the hall wasn't from this world. I sat down on the couch, trembling as the realization sank in. I tried to shake it off and keep going with my day, but that feeling of dread lingered. Eventually, I left for school, already bracing for the next unexplainable thing to happen. In that house, it never took long for something else to show up. It was 1969, and I was stationed at a military base in Charleston, South Carolina. A few of us airmen were hanging out in the rec room one evening, watching the local news when a report caught our attention. It was about a strange occurrence happening in the nearby town of Somerville. The news anchor called it the Somerville Light. We were a curious bunch with nothing better to do, so we piled into a GTO and headed down to Somerville to see for ourselves. Following the reporter's directions, we found an old dirt logging road that ran parallel to I-26, winding through a stretch of dense pine forest. We drove about half a mile before stopping. The humid air was stifling, so we kept the car running with the AC blasting. Rolling the windows down wasn't an option. The mosquitoes were relentless. We sat there for about 30 minutes, growing bored. Nothing was happening, and the idea of waiting in the muggy, dark night wasn't all that appealing. Just as we were about to call it a night, we noticed a small light flickering in the distance. It looked far off, maybe a mile away, but surprisingly, it grew larger and closer with incredible speed. As it came nearer, we realized it wasn't on the road, but slightly off to the side. The light had a strange greenish glow, like the kind you see in a glow stick. Before we could react, it hovered about 3 feet off the ground, just 100 feet in front of us. The light pulsed slowly at first, then began to beat faster and faster. Suddenly, it shot forward and stopped dead in its tracks, right in front of the car. That's when the fear hit. I was sitting in the front passenger seat, and one of the guys in the back screamed for the driver to get out of there. Just as the driver reached for the gear shift, the light surged forward, almost like it was going to crash into the hood of the car. In that instant, the engine cut out, the alternator light flickered on, and all power to the car completely shut down. No dash lights, no radio, nothing. The ball of light continued to hover forward, and with its approach, the temperature inside the car plummeted. The condensation on the windows from the AC froze over instantly, leaving a thick layer of frost behind. It felt as if we'd been dropped into a giant freezer. The eerie green glow filled the car, casting an unnatural light on my friends' terrified faces, their breath visible in the cold air. The light moved through the car, sweeping past us into the back seat before coming to a halt. As soon as it left the car, the frost vanished. The ignition lights flickered back to life, and the engine roared back on. The ball of light stopped behind us, turned around, and began moving back toward the car. This time, the temperature stayed normal, and the frost didn't return. The headlights blinked back on, and the engine started up on its own. The light stopped in front of us once more, its pulse slowing down until it stopped completely. Then, with a blinding flash, it shot off into the dark woods. The radio crackled to life, and without a word, the driver slammed the car into gear and sped away. No one said a word the whole drive back to base. We only shared the story once, with the reporter who originally covered it. Back then, the military wasn't exactly open to strange stuff, like UFOs or supernatural experiences. Bringing it up could get you labeled, or worse, subjected to random drug tests. It just wasn't worth the trouble. 3 years later, after I returned from my tour in Vietnam, I ran into 2 of the guys who'd been there that night. Over some beers, we decided to go back and check the place out again. We parked at the same spot in my rental car, hoping to see the light one more time. This time, though, nothing happened. The road was quiet, and other than our beer breaks, the night was uneventful. As we were heading out, we spotted a local cop parked at the entrance. We asked him if there had been any more sightings. He told us that after the story aired, a team from the University of South Carolina had come out with cameras and equipment to investigate. Their conclusion: it was just headlights from westbound cars on the interstate reflecting off swamp gas created by decomposing vegetation. A simple optical illusion. It sounded plausible enough, but then you had to account for the engine stalling, the freezing cold, and the green light passing through the car. I didn't bother explaining that to the cop. He said the scientific explanation had put an end to most of the sightings. Years later, on vacation in Florida, I met a man from Somerville who had seen the exact same thing. His description was identical to mine, from the green glow to the freezing temperature. Hearing his story made me feel validated, and even my wife finally admitted she believed me. The Somerville light remains one of the strangest, most unexplainable things I've ever encountered. Sure, scientific theories can explain a lot, But sometimes there are experiences that defy any kind of logic. Whatever it was, I'll never forget it. When my husband joined the Army, we were stationed at a base in Arizona. We had just moved into a house that had been renovated a few years before we arrived. We'd heard some strange stories about certain buildings on base being haunted, but at the time, I didn't take them too seriously. It all seemed like just local gossip. Our first unusual experience occurred the night after we moved in. My husband and I had just gone to bed when something woke him up. He sat up, his heart racing, and saw a shadow floating over our bed. As he tried to make sense of it, he heard a soft whisper in his ear, "Your dogs are here to protect you." The shadow vanished, and he told me about it the next morning. We shrugged it off, assuming it was just a weird dream or his imagination. But things took a turn for the stranger a few weeks later, in the middle of January. My husband had woken up early to get ready for work, while I stayed in bed since I didn't have to be up for a while. As he went into the bathroom, I heard the unmistakable sound of a baby crying coming from the spare room. At first, I thought it was the baby from across the street, but then I remembered. They were out of town. In fact, nearly every family on our street was away at that time. The crying continued for a few minutes, and I tried to ignore it, eventually falling back asleep. 2 weeks later, I woke up again in the middle of the night to the same sound, the sound of a baby crying from the spare room. This time, I woke my husband and insisted he go check on the baby. He gave me a look like I was crazy, but I urged him to go. He thought I was still half asleep and brushed it off. I told him I was wide awake and could still hear it, but he couldn't hear anything. He rolled over, annoyed, and went back to sleep. The crying eventually stopped, and I drifted back to sleep as well. But that's when I have the strangest dream. In the dream, a little girl, no older than 4 or 5, came into our bedroom. She walked over to my side of the bed and climbed up next to me, a bright smile on her face. "Oak, Mommy," she said, "I'm ready now." I looked at her, confused, and replied, "Sorry, but I'm not your mommy." Her smile faded instantly, and she became upset, her eyes welling with tears. She insisted I was her mother, begging me to take her with me. She said she didn't want to be left behind again. I felt a strange wave of emotion rush over me, as if I were connected to her. In the dream, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by her desperation, and I walked out of the room, hoping to escape the sadness. She followed me, her voice pleading. That's when I woke up to the sound of our Rottweiler, Sarge, barking like he'd never barked before. His loud, frantic barks woke my husband, who got up to check on him in the living room. When he came back to the bedroom, he looked a little shaken. He told me that Sarge had been on the couch, staring at the bedroom door, growling and barking at something unseen. My husband couldn't see anything, but whatever it was had Sarge's full attention and had clearly unsettled him. We've since moved to a new base, but the memories of that house still linger. I never learned much about the history of the area, but I did notice something odd when I visited the base cemetery. There were many graves of children who had passed away in the same few years. I know the house we lived in wasn't built during that time, but I can't help but wonder if there's some connection to the strange happenings we experienced. If anyone knows more about the history of the area, I'd love to hear more about it. I'm not sure if this is really a ghost story, but it's something that stayed with me for years, leaving me with an unsettling feeling I can't shake. My grandfather passed away during my senior year of high school. I hadn't visited him for a while before he died, and that regret lingered with me for months. I tried to move forward, but something strange happened in my junior year of college that made me think of him in ways I hadn't in years. I was attending a university in upstate New York. Let's call it Millwood University. The campus was vast, with some sections rich in history, especially the old military area on the outskirts known as Camp Whitley. During World War II, it had been one of the largest training grounds for soldiers heading overseas, and after the land was sold to the university, they kept a few old barracks and buildings. The Paymaster building, in particular, was still there. It stood like a relic from another time, creaky, weathered, and full of stories. I worked part-time there for the university's alumni phone-a-thon, calling for donations. It was late in my junior year when I found myself working long hours, often into the night. The first few weeks, nothing seemed unusual. But after about 3 weeks, I began thinking about my grandfather far more than I usually did. It wasn't something I'd done much before, but the knowledge that his infantry division had been stationed at Camp Whitley during the war made me wonder if that had somehow brought his memory back into my mind. I told myself it was just nostalgia, but it felt like there was more to it. One evening, I went downstairs to grab a soda from the vending machine. As I stood there, I heard something strange, hard, heavy footsteps, like boots, clacking across the linoleum floor. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was winter, after all, and boots weren't out of place. But these steps felt different, almost as though they belonged to someone from a different era. I grabbed my soda and turned to head back up the stairs when I heard a voice, a soft, familiar voice. "It's okay, Tommy." I froze. The soda slipped from my hand and crashed to the floor. No one had called me Tommy since I was a little kid, except for my grandfather. I hadn't heard anyone use that name in years, not even my parents. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My heart was racing, and despite feeling terrified, I told myself I must have imagined it. I rushed back upstairs, asking around, hoping to find someone who might have been messing with me, but no one there went by Tommy. I went home that night unsettled, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind. For weeks, I tried to move past it, telling myself it was just some auditory illusion. But then, it happened again. This time, I was standing outside the paymaster building, waiting for the bus. The night air was cold, and suddenly, a vivid image of my grandfather flashed into my mind. It was so clear, so lifelike, that I swore for a moment he was standing right there with me. Then I heard the voice again, as soft as a whisper. "It's okay, Tommy. No harm done." I looked around in a panic, but there was no one nearby, no one who could have possibly said that. The sensation was so real, though, that I couldn't shake it. I didn't know what to make of it, but oddly enough, it also left me with a strange sense of comfort, as if my grandfather was telling me he was still looking out for me. A few months later, in May, I was taking a history class on World War II. We were studying old yearbooks from Camp Whitley, and I stumbled upon a photo of the paymaster building with a group of men in uniform standing in front of it. I asked the professor about it, and he told me that during the war, the building had served as a command center for soldiers passing through. Intrigued, I looked up the unit and learned the men in the photo were part of the 104th Cavalry Group, taken in 1943. My breath caught. My grandfather had been part of the 104th Cavalry Group in 1943, stationed at Camp Whitley. Though he wasn't in the photo, he'd been there, walking those same halls. The realization hit me hard. He'd been there, in that very place, just like the men in the photo. The connection I felt to that moment was overwhelming, and a deep sense of peace washed over me. I hadn't expected it, but somehow, those strange encounters in the paymaster building had helped me come to terms with his passing. I hadn't returned to that old building since, but I'll never forget what happened there. Whether it was truly his spirit or just a manifestation of my own grief, I'll always believe he was trying to tell me that everything was going to be okay. Thanks for listening. I've never shared this with anyone before, not even my wife. After leaving my job of nearly 11 years, I decided to move back to a small town in Oregon to be closer to my family. I rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment with my brother. At first, everything felt calm and routine, but over time, I began noticing strange happenings in the apartment. The most unsettling of these involved a mysterious light that seemed to appear night after night. The first time it happened, I woke up suddenly from a deep sleep, feeling uneasy, like something was wrong. I was lying on my back, facing left. As I turned to the right toward the window, I saw it, an eerie, glowing orb about the size of a baseball, floating just inside my room near the window. At first, I thought it was just the moonlight shining through the curtains. But then, the orb moved, slowly at first, and then faster toward me. That's when a cold rush of fear hit me, as if this wasn't just some reflection, but something conscious, something aware of my presence. Before I could even react, the orb shot straight toward me. I instinctively turned my head to avoid it, but it felt as if something pushed my head back into the pillow. The orb disappeared instantly, and with it, a wave of freezing cold swept over my body. I was wide awake, my heart pounding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Sleep didn't come that night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been nothing more than a trick of the light or the result of too much stress. But that night, the orb came back. This time, it wasn't white, but a dull gray, and the sense of dread surrounding it was even stronger. I found myself lying in the same position, but when I turned toward the window, the orb followed the same path as before, moving closer with a strange speed. Once again, just like the previous night, my head was forced back against the pillow as the orb vanished, leaving behind that same intense, icy coldness. After that, sleep was impossible. The feeling of being watched lingered, and I couldn't shake the thought that whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to stop. By the third night, I dreaded going to bed. The terror that had gripped me earlier now felt like a shadow hanging over me. But eventually, exhaustion took hold, and I drifted into a restless sleep. That's when it happened again. I woke up, eyes wide open, to face the orb directly in front of me. This time, it was a deep, unsettling black, its presence more menacing than before. The fear I felt was overwhelming, far worse than any of the other nights. It felt like it was aware of my terror, like it was deliberately feeding off of it, making it worse with every moment. Once again, it came toward me. I turned my head away, trying to escape, but something invisible forced my head back to face it, and just like before, it disappeared. My heart raced as I opened my eyes again, only to find it there, but now it was white and ethereal, like the first night. The same pattern repeated itself, an endless cycle of fear and confusion, each encounter more disorienting and terrifying than the last. I spent the rest of that night in a haze, praying for daylight to break. By the fourth night, I thought things couldn't possibly get worse, but I was wrong. The orb came for me again, moving with no hesitation. It seemed to change colors every time it appeared. White, gray, then black. It was always the same. A moment of pure dread, followed by my head being forced back. But this time, when the black orb came close, something changed. I felt a sharp, physical force, like a punch to my face. Panic took over, and I bolted out of bed, throwing on every light in the room. I was too terrified to even think about sleeping. The next night, the orb appeared again. This time, however, it didn't move toward me. It hovered near the window, bathed in a soft, milky white glow. I didn't feel the usual fear. Instead, I watched it, mesmerized, as it shifted colors once again, eventually fading into nothingness. I still don't know if it was one orb, two, or maybe even three different ones. And I don't understand why it happened or what it meant. Maybe one day I'll figure it out. 3 years have passed since those nights. I occasionally still see the orb, but I don't fear it anymore. It doesn't seem threatening now. Perhaps it was never meant to harm me, or maybe I've simply made peace with it. Whatever it is, it doesn't seem so scary anymore. I attended the University of Washington for my undergraduate degree, and at the end of my junior year, I moved into an old 3-bedroom house on Cedar Avenue, just a few blocks from campus. My friend Kate and I had the place to ourselves for about a month before our third roommate, Sarah, arrived for the summer. During that first month, Kate and I were extra cautious, always double-checking the doors and windows at night. Neither of us had lived alone in a house before, so we were a bit on edge. From the very beginning, the back door in the kitchen was a problem. Every morning, we'd find the deadbolt unlocked, even though we were certain we had locked it the night before. The handle lock, however, would still be secure. After a week of this, we set up a sort of booby trap with bottles and string around the door to see if it was being tampered with during the night. Oddly enough, while the deadbolt continued to be mysteriously unlocked, the bottles and string were never disturbed. A few weeks later, Sarah moved in, and soon after, she and I came through the back door together one evening. As we stepped inside, I walked under the ceiling light in the kitchen, and just as I passed, the light fixture came crashing down. The glass brushed the back of my head before shattering on the floor, cutting both Sarah's feet and mine. When we inspected the fixture, we found that the screws were still in place, and the glass cover wasn't broken. There was no explanation for how it had fallen. As fall semester approached, Sarah moved out, and Julie moved in. That's when the strange events started to focus on the living room, especially around an old entertainment stand we picked up from a yard sale. The stand had a stereo, a VCR, and a collection of movies housed behind doors, while the TV sat on top, flanked by speakers. Various candle holders and an oil lamp decorated the top of the stand. Almost immediately, weird things started happening. Candle holders would fly off the stand and land across the room. This happened several times, often with all three of us watching. One particular candle holder seemed to have a vendetta against Kate. It struck her on the head so many times while she was kneeling in front of the stereo that it eventually broke. One cold winter evening, I was home alone, studying at my desk when a sudden gust of icy wind blew my bedroom door open with such force that my papers scattered all around the room. It lasted only a few seconds before abruptly stopping. I checked the front door and windows, but everything was shut tight. I was completely alone. The most unsettling event occurred during spring break in 1999. I was staying at the house by myself while my friend Lee, who had come in from out of state, visited for a few days. One night, Lee, a local friend, and I were sitting on the porch, having a few beers around the fire. The house was dark, with the only light coming from the fire. Around 1:30 a.m., we heard a loud crash coming from inside. My first thought was that someone had broken in through the back door. I rushed inside, turning on the lights as I went. In the living room, I found the source of the noise. The oil lamp from the TV stand had shattered. Red oil was dripping down the stand and onto the light tan carpet. At my feet, I noticed a photo that had been on one of the speakers. It had been disassembled. The frame, glass, picture, cardboard, and backing all laid out neatly in a row. The closest piece was over 13 feet from the stand. I sent Lee to check the house for intruders, but the back door was locked, and there was no one inside. I grabbed towels to clean up the mess, muttering aloud, "If you want my attention, you don't have to break things." In the few seconds it took me to return to the living room, everything was gone. The carpet was clean, the TV stand was dry, and there was no trace of the oil lamp or the spilled oil. I couldn't believe it. Everything was perfectly spotless, as though nothing had happened. That summer, Kate returned after being away for a semester. 2 weeks later, she asked me, hesitantly, if I had come into her bedroom the previous night. I hadn't, so she explained what had happened. She'd woken up at exactly 3:14 a.m., hearing footsteps approach her bed. She saw the outline of a man, just his head and shoulders, standing near her. She tried to ask who he was, but no words came out. The figure walked to her bed, sat next to her, and placed a hand on her stomach. She said it was the most comforting sensation she had ever experienced before drifting back to sleep. What left us both speechless was that 2 nights earlier, I'd had almost the exact same experience. I woke up at 3:14 a.m., sat up, and saw the shadow of a man standing in the corner of my room. He moved toward me, but instead of fear, I felt calm, even comforted. He stood by my bed for a while before I fell back to sleep. I hadn't told Kate about it, so hearing her story was shocking, to say the least. The rest of the summer passed without incident, and even the back door stayed securely locked at night. To this day, I'm not sure who, or what, visited us in that house, but it left an impression I'll never forget. In 1992, I decided to take a trip back to my parents' house in a small town in North Carolina, a quiet place nestled between the Smoky Mountains. At the time, I was living in Charlotte, a bustling city about 4 hours away. 5 of us planned the trip, taking advantage of a group flight rate and renting a Jeep to explore the area. Since I was the only one familiar with the region, I acted as the group's guide. The most mysterious event of the trip happened when we broke the rental car rules and took the Jeep down an old, unmaintained road. This road, called Old Hollow Road, cuts through the dense woods and rises up to the ridge between two mountains. Starting near the small town of Black Rock and ending at a place known as Devil's Ridge, the road climbs steeply to nearly 3,000 feet before descending into the thick forest. It's an isolated area, with no lights and no signs of human life, making it an odd place to be at night. We were hoping to catch the sunrise over the mountains, so we set off around 10:30 p.m., under a nearly full moon that bathed everything in eerie light. With the Jeep's top down, the moonlight illuminated the rugged, overgrown landscape around us, creating a surreal and almost dreamlike atmosphere. The road took us past old logging sites and an abandoned ranger station. After that, there were no signs of civilization, especially at that late hour. About 15 minutes into the drive, we saw someone, moving through the forest with a lantern. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but as we got closer, the figure became clearer. It was a person moving quickly through the thick underbrush, carrying the lantern. The ground was uneven, with jagged rocks and tangled roots. Running across it seemed impossible, especially barefoot. I muttered how strange it was, waking up the one person in our group who had managed to doze off during the bumpy ride. The other four of us confirmed we were all seeing the same thing. My heart sank as realization hit me. I screamed at my boyfriend, who was driving, to stop the car and turn off the lights. At first, he laughed it off, but he obeyed when he saw the panic in my eyes. The Jeep rolled to a stop, and the engine and lights went silent. With no wind, the night was eerily still. As we sat there, we could hear the sound of footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves and twigs about 75 yards away. The figure's shoulders seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, but there was something else about the glow, something unnatural. I whispered urgently, telling everyone to look away and stay silent. My female friend bowed her head, her body trembling, but the men in the group just stared, frozen. I leaned into my boyfriend's shoulder, whispering over and over, "I don't believe this. Don't look. Don't move." My voice was barely audible, but I was terrified. The crunching footsteps came closer, then stopped. The silence grew heavier, more suffocating. Suddenly, we heard a low grunt and the sound of something heavy hitting the ground with a sharp crack. I began to cry softly, while my boyfriend sat beside me, shaking as if he were freezing. It ended as quickly as it started. We sat there, stunned, bathed in moonlight. None of us moved or spoke, paralyzed by the encounter. Then, I felt something warm on my bare feet. I realized one of my friends in the back seat had wet himself out of fear. It turned out to be the same friend who had disobeyed my warning and looked directly at the figure. As we continued down the road, I explained to everyone what I believed we had seen, the ghost of an old Confederate soldier. The road ran alongside what used to be a significant military route during the Civil War, and some say it was used by messengers delivering urgent news. In the South, it was considered disrespectful to look at the spirits of soldiers, as they were believed to be bound to the land by their duty. Those who did risked a curse. The friend who had looked directly at the figure described it in vivid detail. He said the man wore an old soldier's helmet, his eyes burned with anger, and he carried a wrapped weapon, which he had dropped on the ground, the sound we all heard. I never told my parents or any elders about what we saw. In Southern culture, discussing encounters like this is considered bad luck, and I didn't want to tempt fate. That same friend, the one who looked at the figure, tragically died in a motorcycle accident a few years later. I can't say for sure if the two events were connected, but I've often wondered. This is the first time I shared this story outside our group. Many locals around here have talked about similar sightings in the woods, but I didn't fully believe them until that night. My advice to anyone visiting the Smokies is simple. Always respect the land and its history. You never know what you might encounter.